Hello everyone and welcome to my retrospective on Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII is easily one of the most important games of my entire life. I can remember days when I used to run around on the playground with friends and we would pretend we were characters from the game. Its roots go extremely deep with me, and I'm going to be honest, doing an analysis on it is an extremely daunting task. So I'd like to say first and foremost that this is going to be a very personal analysis. It is not going to be completely true to whatever facts may exist in the canon and the lore. It is more going to be me relating to the game either emotionally, what I think is interesting in the narrative, or I'll also talk about technical aspects of it at times. Just know that during the course of this, I am not saying that any of this should be taken as concrete gospel. This is absolutely my reflection against the game, remembering parts of my past, analyzing it as I go, and seeing what I can where I can. I'll even say that I imagine most of the things that I come up with during this video as far as analysis are probably wrong if you look up the lore online. But that is not what I'm going to do. I'm going to relate it to me as personally as I can. I'm going to do that for two reasons. One, because this is an extremely personal game to me, and I feel I wouldn't be doing it justice if I didn't do that. And secondly, because I realize that that is actually the one unique thing that I have. You can probably find well over 100 videos online already that will tell you all about the deep lore and the Easter eggs that are in Final Fantasy VII. But what doesn't exist yet, the one thing I have, is how it made me feel as a person. The ways it impacted me growing up, and the thoughts that I have now as an adult analyzing it and relating it to my own life. I did basically the same thing with my Silent Hill 2 analysis that actually worked out surprisingly well, so I think the key here is to just be as honest and transparent as I can be. And so now to begin, my personal reflection of Final Fantasy VII. We start off meeting our enigmatic hero, Cloud. One thing that I find striking about Cloud, having come from a fresh FF6 playthrough, is that Cloud represents as a very strong and capable warrior right off the bat, and this is a far cry from Terra, who is much more kind of lost and confused at the beginning of her playthrough. But, much like Terra, as we know, Cloud is undergoing a mental crisis of his own. I know it's an insane reach, but I almost see him being called an ex-soldier at the beginning of the game more than simply a player agency choice. To me, it feels almost like it could be a narrative choice. Given that Cloud is so deeply ensconced in the delusion that he has created for himself at this point, maybe he even feels as though he has less of a name and more of just simply an ex-soldier identity. Obviously, you get to name your character as you do in most Final Fantasy games, but I wondered if that was some kind of narrative choice. And though I've been told that this warning is actually dialogue from Sephiroth and cut content concerning their time at Nibelheim, I also a lot of times will see this white text voice as the soldier Cloud or the real Cloud himself talking to himself. Though as the playthrough continues, the nature of this voice will change, reflecting Cloud's fractured psyche. I will say a common theme that I've noticed now between 6 and 7 is that oftentimes the evil forces are industrialized and mechanized, and the more helpful human forces that are aligned more with the planet and its life force are often more natural in this regard. Cloud to me is very much a semblance of both of these schools of thought. A cool, calm, collected soldier that he's modeled himself to be, but also the real, emotional person Cloud. We also have our first chance meeting with Aeris, a gentle flower girl with a kind persona who is surrounded by a world of grit, darkness, and aggression. I also find it interesting that the two different answers that you're able to give her, to me, reflect the two different sides of Cloud that exist at this point. The answer that says you'd better get out of here being more aligned with the cool, focused on the job kind of mercenary that Cloud sees himself as, and the one that opens up just a little, though still seems defensive in my opinion, possibly being the real Cloud, the person. We also get this awesome scene where, with all the bravado and panache of a first-class soldier, Cloud makes his triumphant reappearance and says that it looks like I'm a little late very coolly to the Avalanche members. One thing that's occurring to me while I'm making this is that we know later on that Cloud is actually not able to become an S-class soldier. He instead just ends up being basically a normal Shinra grunt. But his belief in himself enables him to basically act like one. And though in reality clearly he was not an S-class soldier, he practically has the power to back it up. To me, at least personally, it feels like a bit of a commentary on how belief is a very big part of being able to confidently execute whatever it is that you're trying to do. We also are given some commentary from Barret that establishes a pretty standard theme in a lot of Final Fantasy games, where there is usually an upper class of people that is kind of seeking to disenfranchise the lower class, Midgar and Shinra being no exception from this. Whatever natural forces may exist in Final Fantasy VII, the planet, and in Final Fantasy VI, Magicite and Espers are also typically exploited by this upper class. The planet is seen by our heroes very much as a live entity in Final Fantasy VII, even having organic features like blood, for example, perhaps in the form of Mako energy or the Lifestream, and even a will of its own. And though Barret feels that even though he is essentially hurting the people that he seeks to help by destroying the reactors that provide power to the slums, he feels that it is a part of a greater good in trying to save the planet as a whole. We also get a brief foreshadowing moment where, if you talk to this man standing outside of the pillar, he mentions that if a bomb were to go off there, the whole plate would come down and crush the sector. I actually find it interesting that not only does Shinra have this pillar that exists, that also has a mechanism attached to it that is able to completely destruct the place if done so. In one way, I see it as them just simply having a way to completely remake the sector if they choose to, but why in such a catastrophic way? Maybe because the entirety of the slums and Shinra's model for their city is one that is built on fear itself. Knowing that this exists, as you would if you lived here inside of this kind of bubble, would certainly put the thought into your mind that were you to disobey the kind of evil overlords, they have the option of basically exterminating you and your entire family as well as everyone you know in one fell swoop. Obviously, again, I know that these are subtexts that are not even likely meant to exist by the developers, and I'm really reaching for a lot of stuff here, but that is basically the point of this analysis, and when I do analysis, I find them most enjoyable to be done this way. Very truthfully, I try to put myself in the mind of the game characters and think, what would they think of this? We also get an introduction to Tifa, who is pivotal in Cloud's arc and is one of his childhood friends. Marlene mistakes Cloud for Barret at first, who she calls Papa, though we will learn eventually that Barret is not Marlene's biological father. This all ends up being another indicator of the fractured world that Shinra has created around themselves. While this doesn't seem all that important at the moment, it will become a very important factor later on in the game when Cloud begins going through his memory crisis. We also once again get a very split decision on Cloud here and how he wants to answer Tifa, indicating to me the kind of fracture that exists between his real self and the hard kind of soldier persona that exists. She also chooses to play along with Cloud's delusion, which I find an interesting choice here, though I believe she states later in the game that the reason she did it is because she is afraid that if she didn't, it would cause Cloud to crack. We also get another glimpse into Cloud's deep soldier persona when he says that he doesn't care about anything, really, including the planet or Avalanche itself. He's simply just here for the money. We know, though, that this is not true to the real Cloud. Cloud, of course, cares deeply for the people that he grew up with, Tifa being one of them, and she attempts to remind him of that fact here. This ends up becoming a very important scene later on because it will be an anchor for Cloud to remember his true past, that he is not actually a clone as is stated by Hojo, and that he was in fact a real child with a real childhood, and that Tifa also experienced alongside himself. It also gives us an idea of who Cloud was before everything that took place and led us to where we are in the game. He was a very ambitious person. Falling short of this ambition, as we will discover later on, was completely devastating to Cloud. I also see this as Tifa potentially testing the waters to see just how deep into the delusion Cloud really is, asking him if he did in fact make Soldier, to which he actually doesn't say yes, he just simply scratches his head, as though he might be failing to remember this. And prepare yourself for an out-of-nowhere, completely ridiculous subtext grab once again. We get this text from Jessie saying that ultimately Cloud's ID card was the problem. She attempted to modify his ID, and that it was what tripped off the sensors on the train. I am aware that this is completely absurd, but I also see it as a possible indicator that at this point in the game, there is a true identity problem that Cloud has. As Jesse said, the problem was specifically with Cloud's identity card. I understand that that's basically just an easy to explain point in the game that Jesse made a mistake and thus they had to abandon ship on the train, but I also see it as Cloud very much himself having a real identity problem as well. Just as we're about to set the bomb in the Mako reactor, we also get another flashback moment to Cloud remembering a part of his true past. He is placed in some kind of disembodied form where he is spectating as a third party to the killing of Tifa's father, and then also the attack on Tifa that takes place from Sephiroth after this. As we will later see in the game though, I find it interesting that during this flashback, Cloud is not seeing himself in the Shinra grunt uniform that we know him to be wearing when we see it later on. He is wearing his soldier's outfit. He is not even close at this point to being able to accept the truth of what he was at the time that these events occurred. I also find this choice of dialogue extremely interesting here. He seems to be remembering. He says ... Tifa as though he is recalling these events, but then he says no, forget, almost as though he's telling himself to forget, not telling Tifa to quote forget it, but instead more commanding himself, the soldier version of Cloud, to simply forget his past. I'm noticing during this that there are a lot of very small nuances in the dialogue that exist like this. If you were conversing with someone and they asked you about something, you would simply say forget it. You would not say forget unless you were simply talking to yourself and trying to convince yourself to forget some important detail, perhaps. We also have this scene with Cloud where he says long time no see to the president of Shinra who has essentially trapped them. He mentions a soldier who quit and attempted to join the resistance, though he can't remember his name. Cloud simply says that it is him, though he is modeling himself after what he knows Zack to have done. After defeating the Airbuster, we also get this interesting bit of dialogue, where Tifa says, please hold on, there is still so much I want to tell you, and Cloud says, I know, Tifa, almost as though deep down he understands that he is not exactly representing his true self right now. We are also then given a split answer that to me again points to this split that exists inside of Cloud, one being a strong kind of soldier persona, and another saying I don't know if I can hold on. To me, this also feels like it has some kind of metaphorical sense to it. Not only is Cloud currently in a precarious physical state, not knowing if he can physically hold on, I also see it as possibly him knowing mentally that he is broken and he doesn't know if he can hold on in that regard. It also then turns out that he cannot physically hold on, given that the reactor explodes and Cloud falls into the depths of despair and what we would assume is death. We also now get a very interesting bit of text where, in my opinion, it appears that Cloud is conversing with his past self and is addressing his current persona. Saying back then I only got scraped knees is a reference quite possibly to how when escorting Tifa in the Mount Nibelheim reactor, they essentially got thrown off of a bridge but still miraculously survived the fall, much like he just did after getting blown off of the reactor bridge. I'd also like to point out this piece of dialogue that Cloud seemingly presses himself on by saying what do you mean by back then, though his deeper self knows that he is not ready probably to face this kind of realization and says simply worry about yourself for now. The final bit of dialogue is particularly striking to me. Cloud asks his subconscious self that is talking to him, hey, who are you? But there is no answer and Cloud comes to. He realizes that he is in a church that he has fallen into, and he has fallen onto a bed of flowers. He also then again meets Aeris, though this time a bit more formally, and this is where you will learn her real name. There is a lot to go into here, so forgive me if this is a little long-winded, but what else should an analysis really be? For one, I find it very interesting that he falls onto specifically flowers. Flowers seen oftentimes as a sign of new life or rebirth, growing from dead things, and Cloud himself is no exception in the metamorphosis that he's currently going through. He just had the first prolonged dialogue with his former self that we have in the game, and I see it as some small foreshadowing that he is eventually going to go through a kind of rebirth and regain his true self. Aeris says that the flowers cannot grow anywhere but the church. This makes sense, of course, on a surface level, given that Midgar is essentially a center of corruption, greed, and desolation. The fact that they grow in the church where Aeris tends to is clear significance that she is different. Aeris is the example of a diamond being forged under great pressure. She has been harried by Shinra all of her life. They have attempted to abduct her several times. Yet through all of this, she remains open, honest, and self-sacrificing. I also believe that she acts as somewhat of a lens of truth for our protagonist Cloud. We also are once again given a split decision by Cloud. Aeris seems to cut through Cloud immediately here by referencing that she saw that he was walking in a daze, though at that point in the game, Cloud seems to be, at least to himself as a narrator, all put together, cool and confident, yet she sees the true kind of inner turmoil, the strife that exists inside of him. It is, of course, no accident that his last name canonically is Strife, for the very reason that he starts off the game as an extremely fractured individual. Aeris will continue to be a pretty helpful source for insight as far as Cloud realizing who he really is, what his real feelings are, and what he really likes. Once again, we're given a split decision, further illustrating his soldier/Cloud persona. I'm going to be keeping an eye on these split decisions that the game is giving us as far as Cloud's reactions to whoever he's talking with, because I'm actually curious at this point if, by the time he has kind of accepted who he is and gone through his metamorphosis, his mental metamorphosis that is, if the decisions change, perhaps he becomes a bit more confident and self-assured. Cloud also says he'll do a little bit of everything and whatever's needed. I guess whatever's needed in his case is adopting a completely fake persona to survive and deal with the trauma that he's been through, and I also find it telling that Aeris laughs at this. I feel like Aeris consistently kind of cuts through his facade, seemingly effortlessly. We also get another flash of white text, though I'm going to be honest and just put this out there now, I'm not always entirely sure if the white text is either Cloud's dominant soldier persona or if it is the real him. In fact, at times, the voice seems to say things that I could associate with either one. Perhaps this is them leaning into the fact that he is very split at the moment. Reno recognizes that they were Mako eyes, as he says here, but I also find it somewhat interesting that he says, "Don't step on the flowers." Oftentimes during this playthrough, the Turks are kind of reluctant bad guys, it seems like to me. There will be multiple instances where Cloud, who is basically their mortal enemy, given that they work for Shinra, will be right before them and they will decide to simply not fight him because they're either having a drink or hanging out and etc. I feel like as far as Shinra goes, these guys seem to have the most conscience out of anyone in the organization, and it also could harken back to the same kind of theme that I detected in Final Fantasy VI, where there will be essentially good people that are caught up in bad systems, and though they are beholden to the bad systems, and oftentimes have to do some bad things as a result of that, it seems that their character reflects that there is something deeper there, that they're not necessarily bad at heart. I'm also extremely proud to report that, thankfully, I was able to push the right barrels and hit the Shinra guys. I've done this thing a million times as I've played through this game many times, but I was a bit nervous, honestly, to mess it up on stream because, come on, it's just a bad look. Thankfully, I was able to pull it off, so, phew. We also have a mention from Aeris about how the Turks have been hounding her most of her life, trying to kidnap her. As we know, this is because they essentially want her for her power and to also run experiments on her, given that she is an ancient. We also get a brief mention from Aeris regarding Zack, her former boyfriend, though she does not say his name here. As you all likely know, Zack and Cloud were great friends, and Cloud even kind of subconsciously has modeled himself, his gestures, actions, and mannerisms after Zack. Much of the game is predicated on these fate-like threads. What are the chances that Aeris would meet Cloud, who was a great friend of her former boyfriend, is now even wielding his blade, and has characteristics and qualities that remind her of him? When going to Aeris' house, we also get a dialogue when Cloud is laying in the bed that she's prepared for him, that he is having with seemingly himself once again. I see it as him talking to the former version of himself, which is the gray text, and the soldier version of Cloud existing in the white text. A couple of things come into my mind when I see this. For one, we get a flashback where Cloud is seemingly talking to his mother about how he's looking for a girlfriend, or rather, he isn't looking for a girlfriend, but his mom wishes he was, and there is also some kind of small romantic subtext that could possibly be inferred by him being in this vicinity with Aeris. I also think it could have to do with him kind of experiencing a warm, loving, cared-for environment, one that he has not likely been in a long time. So it makes sense to me that laying in this bed that was lovingly and caringly put together for him, that it brings out some kind of emotion in him, some kind of reflection of his former life where he experienced this kind of emotion. I also find Aeris's body language here to be actually very interesting. I feel like she is deep in some kind of contemplation here. She has just run into this guy that very much has the exact mannerisms and kind of style that her previous boyfriend did, along with the same Mako eyes that he likely had. I don't think it's any stretch to see why she would be both possibly attracted to and very intrigued by Cloud given this. Aeris also potentially offers something to Cloud that Soldier and his own delusions never could, an unconditional kind of kindness with no real agenda, the bed possibly being a symbol of this emotional safety that she represents. Aeris also shows us that she is far craftier and a bit slicker than one might expect her to be. She even cuts off Cloud as he is attempting to sneak out. Part of me feels like Aeris might even understand Cloud better than he understands himself at this point, since he is basically modeled after Zack through his subconscious. She might expect and even know that he was going to try and pull something like this. It's almost like she already knows Cloud without having to know him. We also get a reflective scene here when they're sitting on top of the cat in the playground and Aeris kind of probes Cloud about his past in Soldier. He has a bit of a flashback, the persona takes over, and he says that he was first class. Aeris goes on to explain that it is the same as her first boyfriend. Though she says that they weren't serious, there is definitely a constant kind of romantic tension between these two that goes on throughout most of the game. Also, I noticed that she doesn't say his name kind of on purpose. I always wondered what would happen if she had said his name here. Would Cloud have simply said never heard of him? Would he have had some kind of mental breakdown and be instantly sent back to what happened? I don't know, but I wonder. We also then see Tifa being carted off to what is essentially the brothel in the slums. This is kind of a thing that you don't see a whole lot in gaming today, I feel like. I feel like overt sexuality is oftentimes avoided in games today for pretty obvious reasons. People don't want to kind of get in trouble for being too suggestive at times. But I find this game actually has a lot of sexual undertones baked into it. I see part of Cloud's whole mission, honestly, from the well with Tifa to him kind of wanting to represent his toughness and his prestige to Aeris here, as just a way to get girls. Essentially, that is almost why he joined Soldier, to become a big name, to become famous, and to impress the mostly female cast that he had engaged with previously in the game. Cloud, though, is a standout from the standard kind of NPC in the game, though. He is far less sleazy, and he is not exactly overt, and is much more subtle about this. Quick note, I always found it pretty funny that when Aeris asks the old man if he's the owner of the clothes shop, the first thing he does is turn around and say, "I ain't your father." I don't know, it's just funny to me. We also have a funny moment where if you go into the Honeybee Mansion, the president, I think, or someone at least related in the president's organization is like in here getting, I don't know, dominated in some way or something. It was just really funny. We also get taken into the Don's mansion where he is going to essentially pick one of the girls for the night and have some fun with them. This just further kind of illustrates this dark, seedy, disgusting world that we actually inhabit, and our characters, by all accounts and by comparison, are paragons of virtue compared to the standard kind of city dweller in this game. Our heroes end up cornering the sleazy Don and threaten to basically mutilate his genitals if he doesn't tell them what they want to know. This was always just a funny part of the game that everyone enjoyed. I mean, come on, who didn't love this? Forgive me if this is a stretch too far, but that is what I am here for after all. I see these three answers as actually representing something much deeper if I look at them closely and overanalyze the heck out of them. I'll say first and foremost, I understand that this is basically just throwaway lines and is probably not meant to actually represent these things that I'm going to go into here, but I'll go into them anyway. I see a multitude of ways to interpret these three answers that were given. For one way, I see them potentially being reflections of Cloud against the other characters, so what do they see in him? Because I've given up on life feels like Tifa's view of Cloud to me almost. She found him in dire straits recently and might be worried that he has in fact simply given up on life. The because I'm sure I'll win answer feels like Cloud's view of himself, the cocky soldier persona. And because I'm clueless feels to me more like Aeris's answer potentially. She understands, I think tacitly, Cloud's true nature and that he is right now a kind of broken individual. The other way that you could interpret it perhaps is that they are all just simply different sides of Cloud. Cloud's depressive side that is negative and will certainly show up in the playthrough, the cocky, self-assured side of Cloud that knows he'll win, or the side of Cloud that is looking for answers and is very hidden at this point. And here is Corneo just in time to say, wrong to my theory. Please remember everyone, I'm doing this for fun. I'm looking for subtext where I know there isn't meant to be any, so I just wanted to reiterate that. When we flash to a scene in the President's chambers, we also see Reeve, who is very much questioning, once again as the Turk seems to do, the morality of the decisions that Shinra is making. Once again, kind of going back to my reluctant bad guy theory that most of the Turks seem to share. Aside from the Turks, I feel like Shinra on the whole is a pretty easy read as far as most of their characters go. They are simply just trying to chase either power or money in most circumstances, and they don't seem to have overly complex kind of motives. They are also just the perfect reflection of typical corporate greed and corruption. The President, seeing Reeve is going through a bit of a crisis, a moral one, says, well, just take a few days off and you'll feel fine. From his perspective, he probably doesn't really have to deal with moral crisis too often, and simply taking a vacation would alleviate him from this kind of thought. For someone like Reeve, who is far more complex, this is not an option, of course. They also lay out their plan to essentially destroy an entire part of the slums, disenfranchise the poorer people, and then gain profit from it. The typical corporate greed kind of overlords. We also get some dialogue here from the characters, which I think is very indicative of how they are as people. Tifa is very fatalistic, I realize, and this also goes back to viewing Cloud as though he's given up on life, and Aeris says to simply never give up hope and that they still may be able to save the sector. It also relates back to me in the way that Aeris sees Cloud as kind of clueless, though not entirely hopeless, as Tifa may see Cloud at this point. If I go even deeper and even crazier, I also see this attitude making sense for the two of them, Aeris and Tifa respectively, given that seemingly Tifa grew up in the slums as we know it, dirty, disgusting, and when things are bad, they're just bad. But Aeris grew up in kind of a bubble within the slums. Her house is this bastion of beauty surrounded by flowers and a hopeful environment, so it makes sense to me that they would both have these kind of personalities to reflect their past and what they grew up in. We also then continue through the graveyard and come to the pillar where a fight is taking place, and we unfortunately make our last meeting with Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse. While climbing the tower, you are able to talk to all three of these people, and you're also able to give them a split personality answer once again, between what I would assume to be the real, sentimental, emotional Cloud, and the cool, disconnected, confident soldier Cloud. We also get a run-in with Reno from the Turks, who, despite me saying that he is good at heart, possibly, does make the decision here to push the button. I guess he is just following orders after all, and ultimately still is part of a horrible engine. I guess one could look at it as though, while they may have some redeeming qualities, they are still essentially bad people working for the bad industry, which is Shinra. Also, I mean, what option do these guys really have? Let's say they did disobey orders, I imagine what would happen to them would be less than ideal from their perspective. To me, it could also be a commentary on how many a terrible regime have existed throughout human history that we know of, and undoubtedly, inside of these terrible regimes, you will have people who are essentially good at heart, or, if placed in an entirely different situation, would never be the monsters that they become. But unfortunately, they are thoroughly corrupted and lose their better natures to the will of the dominant system that they are encapsulated by. And with that, the pillar base is blown and an entire city essentially is wiped out in an attempt to simply get a few vigilante members, further illustrating the true evilness that Shinra represents. They truly enact the idiom here of cutting off your nose to spite your face. I always found this scene particularly horrifying. The mental imagery of an enormous plate coming down and crushing everyone you know and love, your entire town in one fell swoop, is terrifying to say the least. The scene is also underscored beautifully by this reflection that we get of the Shinra president, who essentially orchestrated the entire operation, looking down at the destruction that he has wrought. The opera music swells in the background, and once again, the common human theme occurs to me of the higher classes kind of abusing lower class people in order to gain. I also don't think it's a coincidence that the very next scene that takes place is in the destroyed playground filled with debris. What just took place was an absolute extermination of life, men, women, and children all at once by the evil corporation Shinra. Innocence has been thoroughly and completely destroyed here, but our characters also inhabit this spot. I don't believe them to be truly innocent either, and Barret and Tifa grapple with that fact here. Tifa is unsure of how to feel about this, though Barret is quite sure that still Shinra is the greater evil, and I would agree here, although there may have been better ways than sabotaging reactors to take down Shinra. Honestly, it might be a nearly impossible situation given their reality. It's a damned if you do and damned if you don't kind of situation. However, there is many a common theme in Final Fantasy games I have noticed that is very much about the idea of fighting against overwhelming odds. I also find it interesting that Cloud really doesn't engage in any dialogue here. He is simply still completely trapped in the persona of the soldier in my opinion, and is just very much focused on the mission. Cloud is very much about to get a jolt from what will become basically his obsession for the rest of the game, Sephiroth. This is also the point in the game where Sephiroth, I believe, becomes a bit planted as a seed in Cloud's mind, and eventually his fixation and almost obsession even. Upon being asked what Cloud is planning to do, he ponders briefly on the ancients for just a second. Upon doing so, white text appears on the screen. We then have white text, which I typically associate with Cloud's soldier persona, though in this it seems to be speaking as though it was Sephiroth. It says, "In my veins courses the blood of the ancients, I am one of the rightful heirs." I also take notice that he goes out of his way to say one of the rightful heirs, as though Sephiroth already has the knowledge that other heirs exist, and in fact, Cloud has met her. It is Aeris herself. This is also the first time, I believe, that Cloud acts as sort of a conduit for Sephiroth. This will become more and more drastic as well as the game goes on, eventually with Cloud becoming almost a puppet of Sephiroth, a slave to his will. It seems to me that somehow Sephiroth is able to almost implant ideas, emotions, or memories into Cloud's mind at will. And this kind of grandiose statement would only ever be said by Sephiroth himself. We are also then given some backstory by Elmira. She tells us about Aeris' past, how she was found during the war, and her mother essentially died, and Elmira took her under her care. I find it striking that even though Aeris lost her mother to Shinra, she doesn't seem to have a deep, baked-in hatred for them. She views them almost like clowns, and as though this whole thing is a bit of a game, as referenced by the conversation that we had earlier with her. It shows that Aeris truly is someone who, through all odds, remains hopeful and optimistic and has a good outlook on life. Aeris, much like Marlene, is another orphan of the war that was created by Shinra. Aeris could have just as easily turned out to be another standard kind of slum personality, someone who is typically dour, thinks the worst is going to come to them in life because that's basically all they've experienced because of Shinra's greed and the corruption that they've spread, along with the lives that have been lost along the way. But still, through all of this, she resists this. She also seems to fully accept and tacitly understand in some way her destiny as the sole ancient survivor. Aeris is even able to spit some prophetic lines, like telling Almyra that she knows that unfortunately she has lost someone close to her and that they've already returned to the planet, keying us into Aeris's ancient nature and her deep understanding and connection with the planet. This makes apparent to me that Aeris is an example of, while still going through grief and experiencing darkness, that she chose to grow inside of it. She did not let it corrupt her, but instead had a counter-reaction to it almost. This is a common human theme that often happens in many of the Final Fantasy games I've noticed. When confronted with overwhelming odds or despair, there are one of two choices. You can, as many people will, wilt under the pressure, which is a common human reaction. The less common human reaction, though, to have, and the one that Aeris does, is to grow from it, to use it as a fuel to bolster your character. This is a common theme that I notice when I listen to, say, historical aspects or stories of humans in the past. During great wars or times of great strife, there is always a subsect of humans that are able to enact this philosophy, to laugh in the face of grief even, and to overcome it this way. Aeris is essentially the embodiment of this attitude, of hope being born from grief. We also learn that in a beautifully altruistic move, Aeris offered to exchange herself for Marlene, so thankfully Marlene is upstairs safe in the house and reunites with Barret here and Tifa, but Aeris is now in the hands of Shinra. We also then speak to Marlene, who says that Aeris was asking a lot of questions about Cloud, and we get the cute kind of kid moment of her thinking that there is some kind of romantic thing going on between these two. But I think there's also something deeper going on here. Aeris, I think, has some kind of innate understanding of her role to play in the planet, and I think she probably understands that Cloud also has the same kind of role to fulfill. Perhaps this is why she has a bit of an interest in him, also being somewhat and possibly subconsciously reminded of Zack alongside this. The team resolves to bravely go into the belly of the beast, Shinra headquarters, where she now is, in order to save her. Our heroes then climb up to the upper sector, where the Shinra headquarters are, using a wire that is suspended against a wall. In the background of this whole thing, we can see the crushed plate, the destruction that Shinra has recently wrought. I also find it funny that oftentimes Shinra, though they are the evil empire, is often portrayed as pretty incompetent. Here we have the guard snoozing on duty, who instead of alerting the forces, is having a nap and doesn't see Cloud and the others bust in. Also, I think it is a pretty incompetent move overall to completely destroy one of your city's sectors in an attempt to get just a few vigilante members. One of their own employees even gives our would-be terrorists the key card that allows them access to the rest of the building. After climbing through some vents, we come to a board meeting essentially, where they are estimating the damage to the sector, though the president says that the sector will not be rebuilt. They are simply going to rate hike and divide the income between some of the board members and then start the Neo Midgar plan. This just further illustrates Shinra's kind of evil nature. Not only have they killed many of their own citizens, they are now going to tax them even harder, while all the while selling the idea that they were the ones who saved the citizens from the terrorist group Avalanche. The only one who seems to have any moral objection to this is once again Reeve, but the president is confident that the ignorant citizens, the sheeple essentially, will go along with the plan well. To me, it feels like a very real commentary and reflection of real life. Throughout human history, there have been things like this, where the government was in fact behind whatever cataclysmic event that took place, or in some part orchestrated it at least, and then attempted to profit and gain off of it. We also are introduced to Hojo, who is a pivotal character and is very important as far as being responsible for many of the events that will take place today. Because of his infusion of Genova cells into various characters that then affects their will, we end up in our very precarious situation. We also then get this scene where Cloud simply says Genova. Genova, I don't believe, has been referred to in an open-air dialogue yet until this part of the game, when Cloud, when looking at this biolab, simply seems to kind of understand instinctually, likely because he is infused with Genova's cells, that Genova is inside of this. It has a profound physical effect on him, and he instantly connects Genova and Sephiroth at this point, and he knows that they've been here. It also shows us that Cloud does not have full control over his faculties, especially when under the influence of Sephiroth or Genova. Though Sephiroth himself, as we know, is currently centered in the crater in a kind of mass of materia, he is using Genova as a conduit to kind of communicate with and influence Cloud. We still have also not even seen an image of Sephiroth, and the images that we will see of him are actually supposed to be, canonically I believe, simply Genova being used by Sephiroth to kind of extend and portray his will. The Sephiroth kind of images that we will see coming up are not the actual Sephiroth, but are merely Sephiroth projecting himself through Genova's power. Upon coming to the base of the lab, our crew notices the, forgive the pun, ghastly experiments that Hojo is attempting to run, where he is attempting to breed Aeris and Red XIII, a character that was also just introduced to us. Hojo sees Red XIII, who could be argued as an animal, and I'd say basically is, but also Aeris as simply an animal. He says that if he doesn't breed them, then their species will go extinct. The crew, and specifically Tifa here, seems to be impressed and make a note of just how okay Aeris is. She doesn't seem like she's really been rattled by this, and once again, she is a beacon of hope and optimism, even in the worst of times. We are also then later captured and brought before the president, where he explains his plan to essentially exploit as much Mako as he can by finding the Promised Land, and the Cetra, which Aeris is supposedly the last remaining survivor of, will deliver him to this goal. Once again, Shinra's aims are very kind of superficial for me. They basically just want as much money and power as they can. Their aims seem almost juvenile to me when we compare them to the aims of either Sephiroth or our heroes, who are working for much larger goals. While in the Shinra hold, we get a funny line that underscores a little bit the tension in the game between Cloud and the other female leads, and we also get Aeris saying that though she doesn't exactly understand what the Promised Land is or where it is, that she does understand that Cetra and herself have a crucial role to play inside of it. After a quick snooze, the team awakens and notices that all of the guards and people are dead now on the floor. I believe this is part of Sephiroth extending his will, controlling Genova through it, and actually wanting to break Cloud out of his current hold. The reason being is that Cloud will be instrumental in delivering Sephiroth back into the world. We also find the president of Shinra dead, impaled by Sephiroth's mass immune. I see this as a few things. For one, it could be Sephiroth striking back at the figurehead of the company that had such a terrible impact on him, infused him with Genova cells, thanks to Dr. Hojo and etc. Also, it could be kind of clearing the field. This is very likely going to send Shinra into a bit of a tizzy, and will make it that much easier for Sephiroth to act unimpeded by something like Shinra. Sephiroth sees himself as the heir to the planet, the one true ruler that is destined to be. By eliminating the president, who was just previously making plans to reach the Promised Land and then exploit it, he is getting rid of the competition. This is also when we are introduced to Rufus, the new would-be head of Shinra, and our heroes triumphantly state all of their causes in front of him. Rufus does not seem at all bothered by this. In fact, it's kind of funny to him. He says, "What a crew." I always enjoyed this line. I also find it interesting that Rufus is not at all seemingly dismayed by his father's death. In fact, I think he even welcomes it. Like many a power-hungry young prince throughout history, he has grand designs that he starts going into here. He also, though, like his father, is pretty simple on the surface, I think. Though his father was more oriented towards profit, Rufus wants to simply rule by fear. So, while the apple may not fall far from the tree, this apple fell from the tree and rolled into a gutter and somehow ended up being worse. This is actually a thing that we see a lot of times in histories with rulers and long dynasties. A lot of times their children are that much worse version of themselves, being an even more brutal dictator than the one that came before them. We also then get a fan favorite scene that has gone down in history. Cloud appears on a motorcycle ripping through the Shinra headquarters, our heroes jump into a car, and we bust out onto the highway, and one of the more fun mini-games, although a bit hard to control, takes place. I will say though, as a little kid, this was the coolest thing in the world. It literally is built for 13-year-olds to love it, and I'd say mission accomplished, because me and my friends thought this was frickin' awesome. Our heroes valiantly rip through the bad guys, defeat a boss at the end of a completely unfinished highway, and then we finally get onto the world map for Final Fantasy VII. We also get an interesting kind of visual here. We have a road that essentially leads to nowhere, but Cloud seems to have his mission intact. It is that he has to settle the score with Sephiroth. Quite honestly, I'm not sure what he's referring to when he says settle the score, though he seems to understand that it would save the planet. I'm not sure exactly how Sephiroth has wronged Cloud at this point enough for there to be a score to settle with him. Perhaps this is more of the soldier persona of Cloud speaking out. It feels that it has some kind of score to settle with Sephiroth, and so now Cloud is getting that much more fixated on that mission of confronting Sephiroth. On top of this, Jenova's cells, along with the reunion theory, are likely pushing Cloud to seek out Sephiroth, given that he also has cells in his body. This is an easily kind of justifiable reason, given that Sephiroth seems like the new threat on the scene. During the next scene in the Calm Inn, we get a glimpse into Cloud's past, or what he thinks is his past at least. What he is recalling here is actually his memories of Zack. We will know later on that Cloud was simply a Shinra grunt, and he was observing Zack in this scene that we will see with Sephiroth coming up. Tifa's silence here also harkens back to the fact that she knows that most of this is completely inaccurate. She has her own memories and has not been tainted by Mako the way that Cloud was. She has an actual intact memory of it, though she doesn't say anything here because, again, I believe she is afraid that if she does, it will cause Cloud to have some kind of mental crisis. We also get our first ever actual sighting of Sephiroth, though in flashback form, and in this state he seems to be much more affable. He is kind of the older, more professional soldier, and Cloud being the younger kind of upstart. We also are able to witness Sephiroth's incredible power, and this flashback is taking place in history, so we can only assume that he is that much stronger by now. I also see Cloud and Sephiroth as somewhat mirrors of each other as well. They both have a haunted past, though Sephiroth seems a little less keen to talk about his. When they come to Nibelheim, Sephiroth asks Cloud, though off-screen, as we know he is actually talking to the blue soldier grunt that Cloud is, and not the Zack villain that Cloud has placed himself to be. Sephiroth is asked about his past and simply laughs it off, as though he doesn't want to even go there perhaps. He does say that his mother is Jenova, but when he thinks about his father, he starts laughing, and says, never mind. Sephiroth also makes mention of how the scenery feels like something that he's seen before, perhaps having some kind of understanding of Jenova, its place here, and his connection to it, though not consciously. Tifa is shown to be the guide here, and Cloud addresses her, saying that it is too dangerous, though Tifa seems to make no mention or exclamation at seeing Cloud after all this time. The unreliable narrator cracks begin to show here and now. There is also a picture taken, at least in Cloud's memory here, and he is inside of it. This will become important later on. Cloud also has the memory of the most unreliable bridge in the game snapping for the first time and sending Sephiroth, Cloud, and Tifa down below. This will be mirrored later on in the game, and I think it is some kind of mix-up of memory that he is having. perhaps putting himself in Zack's place, and I'm not sure if this actually took place or not, though it may have. The bridge snapping and the many different psyches of Cloud that exist, and the many different stories that get told about this, can also maybe serve as a metaphor. Him falling short of his goals, not becoming a first-class soldier, feeling disappointed in himself, and thus the bridge snapping kind of creates this impossible divide that Cloud was never able to quite cross. We also get some insight into exactly what materia is, which is essentially Mako energy infused with the knowledge of the ancients. People who wield it are able to control the elemental powers of the planet. Sephiroth also expounds a bit on his dislike for Professor Hojo, saying that he was an inexperienced man tasked with taking over the work of a great scientist. This is also where Sephiroth realizes that Hojo is conducting experiments on soldiers by infusing them with Mako energy. This is partially, in turn, what leads him to believe later on that he was created by Hojo and is what catapults him into madness, more or less. He even goes on to say that Hojo is what produced these monsters. Essentially, though, he will see himself as a monster of Hojo's creation in due time. This line that Cloud asks Sephiroth, "Are you different from the soldiers?" seems to send Sephiroth into the spiral that begins his madness. Although I wonder, and I don't think that Cloud ever actually said this to Sephiroth, how much of this is actually true. Did Zack say this to Sephiroth and Cloud is simply recalling it from his memories? Did some somewhat close version of this conversation maybe happen that tilted Sephiroth into madness? I'm not entirely sure, but Sephiroth expounds on how, from a kid, he felt he was different. At this very point, a Mako-infused soldier, some horrifying creature, bursts forth from the capsule, kind of signifying and showing Sephiroth's monstrous transformation that takes place here. We also learn that Sephiroth then confines himself to the Shinra mansion where he is locked in the basement, attempting to understand his past by reading the memoirs from the Shinra scientists that are contained therein. Sephiroth also seems to fully believe that Jenova is in fact his mother, and that the Jenova project is tied to him in some way. Cloud also states that he continues to read as if he were possessed by something, though Cloud doesn't know at this point that he basically is. Sephiroth is heavily infused with Jenova's cells, so it would make sense that he is essentially drawn to this topic. Sephiroth then has been fully convinced that he is in fact a clone, a product of the Jenova specimen, and is in fact simply a part of Jenova, and that he is entitled to the planet as one of the few remaining Cetra. One thing that I'd like to say, though, is that when reading these notes, they are actually inaccurate and full of what I would call Shinra's hubris in believing that they are creating some kind of new race, and this actually fools Sephiroth into believing that he is not a biologically born person, but rather a construct that was created by Shinra scientists. I find it interesting that despite all of his strengths, his portrayal as a mythical figure, he is broken by this information, which is also not true in fact. Cloud, when being told this same thing later in the game, simply says that he doesn't care. To me, I see a larger strength of character inside of Cloud, something that Sephiroth actually does not have. And once again, we get the mirror of Cloud and Sephiroth, where they both have their own identity crisis. Both are heavily affected by Jenova cells and false narratives about who they are. The documents could represent dangerous, incomplete knowledge, something that destroys people when they cling to it too much. We also see the scene where the town has been set ablaze, seemingly by Sephiroth in his madness, and Cloud is looking for survivors, though he cannot find any. Perhaps this is the score that Cloud was wanting to settle Sephiroth with, though I'm not entirely sure that this existed in his mind until he recalled it at this point in the Calm Inn, so once again, I'm a bit unsure on that. We also then have this incredibly famous cinematic where, after killing some villagers, Sephiroth turns coldly towards the camera, his green Mako eyes shining, and then walks through the flames, symbolizing his true descent and final state of being an absolute madman and the true villain, the epitome and embodiment of evil. Cloud runs to the reactor, and this is where we have a flashback in the Calm Inn to the previous flashback that we had when in the reactor, Cloud remembered this moment and seemed like he was going to say something to Tifa, though he shied away from it. Sephiroth in his fully delusional state, and quite possibly driven by the Genova reunion, which the cells are inside of him, stands at the door and says, "Mother, I'm here for you." He also slashes Tifa to the ground, and Cloud comes in at this moment. This scene is both a mix of real things that happened, as we will discover later in the game, and the myth that Cloud has inside of his mind. He is simply putting himself in the wrong part or the wrong side of the story here, though a lot of this did actually happen. In this next scene, Sephiroth's true rejection of humanity is on full display. He chooses Genova and what he believes to be his mother over everything else, essentially declaring war on his own species. Genova, by my understanding, is much a being like Lavos, an extraterrestrial being that eventually encountered the planet, and I believe even created the crater impact scar on the planet that we now know when this happened. Though I also again believe that the Cetra were able to defeat Genova and send it into a kind of remission. Sephiroth feels inextricably tied to Genova though. Sephiroth also views himself as basically the new messiah figure within the world. He is going to usher in a new era under his dominion. Everything else, like Cloud's sadness in the world and the killing that he's done, is just a mere trifle compared to the greatness that he will create. This is when our story abruptly ends as given by Cloud, leaving our heroes with many questions, given that this ended at what was practically the climax for the entire story. Cloud says that he can't remember, and Tifa goes silent. This whole thing is to serve a purpose later on, to paint Cloud as a pretty unreliable narrator, and he turns out to be that. I also briefly tried to get the Midgar to knock some of my teammates out of the ring and use his beta skill, but then I kind of second thought it, and I was like, you know, I remember this kind of trivializing a lot of the early game, having beta this early, so I decided to just simply go on without it. This is also where we get the now famous scene where, upon entering the cave nearby after getting a chocobo, we see the Midgar stuck on a large spike of wood. Cloud asks, did Sephiroth do this? And that's basically all that's said here. This is an excellent piece of myth building that pertains to Sephiroth. We are already several hours into the game, and we have actually not even seen him once in person. We have seen him in a flashback, and that is it. This game does an incredibly great job of building up Sephiroth's mystique throughout the whole thing. I actually counted the number of times that you see Sephiroth, either in cinematic form or in person as Cloud, and it's about 10 times the entire game, depending on what you want to include in that category. That is how you build up the mystique of a villain in the game, not by having the villain constantly be appearing, taunting, harassing the main protagonist. That completely ruins the mystique of Sephiroth in my opinion. We also run into the Turks, who tell us that they are now on the tail of Sephiroth, and their mission is to also stop us along the way. I guess this is their mission now, given that I think they would be suspecting that Sephiroth killed their president, given the blade that was stuck in his back, though I'm not entirely sure how they did get onto this line of thought, and how they would even know who the blade belongs to, but I guess we'll just kind of leave that as is. Once again though, I find it interesting how these guys are basically reluctant bad guys a lot of the time, and it's very much more a job for them, what they have to do and have been assigned to do, which is stop our team and find Sephiroth, and for our guys, it's more a real kind of life calling or mission for them. It's not something that they feel they're forced to do out of obligation, but instead something that they are compelled to do. They're also just at times very dopey. They offer a pretty good amount of humor in this regard, and Elena is oftentimes the butt of the joke in some ways, in that she's very inexperienced and green and says a lot of kind of just dopey things. We also run into Fort Condor, a village that is protecting the Condor's egg on top of the mountain and is fighting the evil, kind of imperious, oppressive forces of Shinra, and with our help and a little bit of guild funding, you're able to play a pretty fun minigame here where you can help defend the reactor. These guys are basically PETA in the Final Fantasy VII world. I always thought this minigame was a little strange, but then I actually went back and played Final Fantasy VI, and I realized that some of the inspiration for it in 7 may have very well come from 6, because 6 has a lot of minigames that are very much like it. I also took some time to pick up the side character Yuffie, though I'm not entirely sure why. I feel like every playthrough I want to get her, I get her, I basically never use her, and then she steals all of my materia every time and I have to do the Wutai sequence. I don't know, it just is some kind of weird self-flagellation ritual that I have to do every time I play through this game, I guess. Also, I'm not sure that I really have much to say about Yuffie's character. Quite honestly, I'm not all that interested in Yuffie's character. In this game specifically, she seems to be basically just a nuisance, maybe have some funny lines, and that's about it. I feel like she's pretty surface level and there's not a lot of depth for me to go into on her. After going to Junon Harbor and defeating the big bad snake, we have Priscilla on the beach who is basically unconscious and we need to give her mouth to mouth. I always found this to be one of the stranger minigames in the game. It also teaches you how to do CPR incorrectly. You do not want to take enormous breaths and then blow deeply into the person's lungs. That can actually harm them and damage their lungs. Anyways, moving on. While sleeping at the inn though, we get another encounter with Cloud's kind of real self as I see it. It's seeming to kind of want to point Cloud in the direction that his memory isn't entirely accurate. It starts asking him kind of pointed questions about where was Tifa and what was she doing, and that it was a good chance for them to see each other, and it starts maybe becoming apparent to Cloud that he isn't being completely honest with himself. Also, the way that his real self, which I assume it to be, talks to him says things like, "You'll find out soon," which lends me to believe that Cloud knows deep down that this story is kind of phooey, and that in fact there is a much deeper truth hidden that he will soon discover. Cloud does ask Tifa, but she says that she doesn't remember. Perhaps this is because of the trauma she went through, losing her father in that moment, also going into a coma for a week afterwards, maybe messing with her memory. But perhaps she does know, and she is simply trying to spare Cloud the mental anguish, at least for now, choosing a kind of mercy over brutal honesty path, and hoping that they can come to a more healing conclusion later on. Thankfully, there's a distraction ready to go, and they are both on their way. We also get a scene that I think is actually interesting to me, given that once we climb up the Junon Tower and get into Shinra's harbor, their kind of stronghold base on the ocean front, Cloud is immediately mistaken for a Shinra soldier and is put in a Shinra uniform, though I feel like even though he reminisces on being proud about when he puts it on, he is still pretty unnatural in this state. To me, it could be some kind of commentary on how this was never Cloud's kind of true role. He never really felt like he truly was a Shinra soldier, and thus this personality that he is displaying is not true to the real Cloud. We also get another mention of Sephiroth, illustrating that he is but a myth in this land. People only whisper about him, saying that he is going through the city and killing soldiers, and that no one has seen him. Another excellent piece of myth building in our entire arc here for Sephiroth. This is another enormous reach, I know, but when I go into the tavern and talk to Rude, he says that I need to take my mask off and that that's the rule if I want to hang out with them while they're having a good time and drinking. Again, it kind of just makes me feel like these guys are really just playing a part and this is a job for them, so they are kind of taking their masks off, i.e. their actual work personas, and just hanging out and having a good time. Something the Turks do a lot of times, and it seems like they quite often kind of take their masks off and just enjoy themselves versus actually being slaves to their job. After doing our little dance for Rufus, and thankfully I was able to pass it this time and get the hard edge, we sneak onto the Junon ship and are headed across to the other continent. I always loved this funny line from Red XIII where he says that he thinks he makes a good human imposter, and when he turns around, his tail is sticking out of his uniform. Just classic funny Final Fantasy. We also get this line of dialogue from Tifa where she says that she hates wearing the Shinra uniform and that they take away all the things and the people you love. This is very much in line with Tifa's experience, and it makes me think that she may very well remember her past quite well. She certainly remembers Cloud leaving for Shinra, and she may even also remember her dad being killed by Sephiroth essentially. After being alerted that there is a stowaway on the ship, we go into the brig and we find the first image of Sephiroth that we have ever seen. Speaking his typical grandiose kind of lines, he simply rises up out of the floor and then attacks our party. Though I've been told that this isn't actually Sephiroth, it's merely a projection of Sephiroth that is being kind of channeled through Jenova, it is our first actual in-game sighting of Sephiroth, even if it is not actually him. I also find Sephiroth's answer here to be interesting on several different levels. He asks Cloud, "Who are you?" This could be a kind of meta-reflection question for Cloud, given that his identity is very fractured at this point, and it's a question that he's almost asking himself. To me, in some way, it could be Sephiroth even weaponizing Cloud's uncertainty at this exact moment, given that Cloud is starting to show the cracks in his soldier persona. Another way that I could possibly interpret it when Sephiroth asks, "Who are you?" might be a genuine curiosity, given that maybe he even has the memory of this person standing before him as the one that essentially defeated him. As we will see later in the game, Cloud is stabbed by Sephiroth's sword, but is able to then use the sword that he has been stabbed with and throw Sephiroth into the Mako reactor holding the Jenova head. This also goes back to my kind of mirror theory that exists, I think, between Cloud and Sephiroth. They are both people with a broken identity, though I see Sephiroth as having accepted his false identity more and allowed it to define him, though Cloud is not entirely there yet. Cloud is still split between his real personality and the fake identity that he has established. I would also like to just take a couple minutes, very likely at this point, to talk about just how incredible the music is in this game. This music is some of my absolute favorite music of all time. I will literally just put this kind of stuff on in my car. It's been some of my favorite music throughout the entirety of my life. Nobuo Uematsu, as far as I'm concerned, is an absolute genius, and it is really incredible to go through this series as I have been and see how it has kind of progressed and become what it is. I will be forever thankful to him for the rest of my life for creating this music, which is some of my absolute favorite. This game would not be what it is or nearly impactful if it didn't have the same music that it does. It perfectly encapsulates the vibe of whatever place it is that you're in and whatever it is that you're doing. After this, we come to the resort town that is Costa del Sol, and while I don't have much to say about this town, I will say that I always loved this part of the game. I love the Costa del Sol music, once again, going back to Nobuo's absolute genius, and I just wanted to point out how much I love this place and its track. We also then talk to an old man sitting on the side of the road that says he has recently seen a man in a black cape traveling through, and the game just does such a good job of making you feel like you're hot on Sephiroth's heels, but he's always just one step ahead of you. I also then come to the part of the game where I will have to make the most incredibly difficult, emotionally loaded decision that I will make in the entire playthrough. Do I leave the treasure that the little baby birds have, or do I take it like the bastard that I am? And of course, I take it, and I feel terrible about it, and I will do that every single playthrough. I don't have a better explanation for it than that, so there you go. I also went down underneath the tracks and I found a man living in a hole. I'm not sure that I had ever actually seen this in a playthrough before. Maybe I had and I was just forgetting it, but basically this guy lost his job and now he lives in a dirty hole under the train tracks. It was very interesting getting to see a flash of my future self, but it was also a little bit too much, so I had to leave. When we get into the Corel town, Barret is instantly kind of recognized by a lot of the people there, and they say, hey, he's back, and the story gets explained to us that essentially Barret is responsible for the town's destruction and sorry state, though he doesn't want to go into it any further than that, and our party moves on, at least for now. This will eventually become a very big part of Barret's redemption arc later on in the game. If you talk to this guy sitting down in the mining town, he'll also tell you about a man that he saw with a tattoo of 1 on his arm passing through the town in a black cape, another great example of myth building for our main villain. Before getting on the tram though to go to the Golden Saucer, Barret does give us some backstory. Essentially, he lived in a mining town and Shinra wanted to take it over and build a Mako reactor there, which Barret was in favor for, and the one standout was Dine, who was one of Barret's great friends. Unfortunately, Fortunately, Dine is able to be broken down and agrees to let them install the Mako reactor, and this is what spells disaster for the town. Shinra, after being attacked at the Mako reactor apparently, ends up razing the town completely, and all of Barret's family and friends and relatives are killed. This is a very large part of Barret's backstory and about the guilt and the burden that he carries. Apparently, there was an explosion at the reactor, and Shinra used this as an excuse to essentially raise the town and set an example. If you oppose us, this is what will happen to you. This is a typical move so far in the Shinra playbook. They will promise progress and improvement of life, but all the while they will be exploiting resources and subjugating the lower class. We also then come to the Golden Saucer, a floating city in the sky that has many fun things to do in it. There's an arcade, as well as chocobo racing and the battle arena as well. I find this to be interesting thematically for a couple of reasons. We are taking part in this quest that is essentially trying to save the world, but there is also this entire section of the populace that is basically unaware of the entire kind of situation that is happening. This place kind of reflects that to me. Some of our heroes' attitudes even echo this. For example, Aeris is just simply happy to be here and says that it looks like fun, though she knows that is not the right time to do it. It's a stark contrast going from Barret talking about his entire family being destroyed, killed by Shinra along with his wife, to suddenly having this jovial music playing through and we're in this brightly colored place all of a sudden. I feel like it's also another reflection of the insane disparity that exists between these two kind of worlds in Final Fantasy VII. You have places like the Shinra slums as well as Corel Town that are basically just depressed, run-down, ramshackle areas, and then right in their same vicinity is this extremely expensive, well-built kind of fun house. We also meet Cait Sith, who is, as we will discover later on, essentially being piloted by Reeve, and Reeve, being one of the more virtuous-seeming members of the Turks, seemingly wants to help our heroes, and like I've said before, I think he is not all bad, even though he is involved in a bad industry, essentially. He also reads us a fortune that will foreshadow essentially Aeris' death and Cloud's future. Cloud will gain what he wants in finding understanding with himself and being able to defeat Sephiroth, but along the way, he loses someone very dear to him. When we visit the battle arena, we notice that there are many dead Shinra grunts and even dead employees. They wonder who would have done it, and they see that all the bodies have bullet holes in it. Barret has just recently run off in a bit of a rage, and the game is trying to make us think that quite possibly it could be Barret who perpetrated these attacks. The gang is caught and thrown down into Corel prison, where they also find Barret. Corel is essentially a desert that prisoners are thrown into, and they say that once you get in, you never get out. Cloud and the group try to talk to Barret, but he wants nothing to do with you and says that he is figuring this out on his own. We even get a moment where it seems like Barret might turn on the group and shoot us, though it turns out that he is instead wasting some guy that was hiding behind the couch. Who knows what that guy was trying to do? Maybe that guy was just like taking a nap or squatting or something? I don't know. Barret just wasted him. Anyways, this is what tilts us into the full Barret arc kind of story. Barret tells us all about his past with Dine. Dine is the father of Marlene, who Barret has since adopted. Barret also tells us about Dine, who was a great friend of his, and the other man that has a gun grafted onto his arm. The cinematic ends up showing us why. Barret and Dine were only able to see the town burning from a distance, and they weren't sure what happened. Dine, I see, is a very reflective character of Barret. Not only do they share the same gun arm, but they also represent different sides of the coin on how one can react to tragedy. Barret and Dine essentially shared the same experience. They both lost their town, lost members of their family, but they turned out slightly different. Barret is more rage-filled and revenge-bent, his entire mission in life being to essentially destroy Shinra as an act of revenge for destroying his family. Dine seems to go the other way though. He takes a much more nihilistic approach, and he's even kind of crazy given that he wants to kill his daughter so she can go see her mother. To me, it's just a commentary on how different people, depending on their temperaments, react very differently to certain catastrophic events in their life. Some people may absolutely be broken by whatever it is that happens to them, and others may use it as a source of strength and attempt to overcome whatever it is. After defeating Dyne, he says that it is not worth living anymore and that he thinks Marlene wouldn't even recognize him and that his hands are too bloodstained to carry her anymore. This also seems to spark something in Barret, making him realize that all along the way, he has also essentially been a killer too, even though he is doing it in a justified way because in his mind he's getting revenge on Shinra, he still is a killer nonetheless. This serves as a pivotal moment for Barret for finally realizing and acknowledging the true reasons why he fights. After racing our way to freedom on the back of a chocobo, we are headed off on our way towards Cosmo Canyon, which is one of my favorite parts of the game. We also get this brief scene in this village where Cloud stumbles into someone who says they are looking for their long-lost son named Zack, and Cloud says that he can vaguely remember the name, though he's not sure why. Upon arriving in Cosmo Canyon, we learn that Red XIII's actual name is Nanaki, and that this is his home. We also learn from Bugenhagen that he is supposedly the last of his kind, an extinct species nearly. This offers another quiet parallel to Aeris as well, given that she is believed to basically be the last of her kind, the Cetra, and there is some connection between the two of them being placed together in the Shinra laboratory, I believe. Red XIII tells us some of his backstory about how his brave mother fought valiantly here to defend the canyon and his cowardly father ran away. His life mission now is to defend this canyon as he believes his mother to have done so. We are also introduced to Bugenhagen, who Red XIII refers to as his grandfather and seems to have a loving, mentorial kind of relationship with. This is also where Bugenhagen goes into a bit of lore, talking about the planet and its lifespan, once again painting the planet as more than simply a rock floating through space. The planet in this world is very much a live entity with its own kind of wills, wants, desires, and emotions, and Bugenhagen further illustrates this point to us. In this scene, Bugenhagen explains to us that the entire energy is essentially the planet sharing energy with itself. Every living creature, humanoid, beast, and etc. is just energy of the planet that when it dies, travels elsewhere through the life stream and then becomes life anew. This really gives me strong kind of indigenous or Native American almost vibes to it. The planet is treated as a bit of a living relative and not an object. There's a deep respect and a sense of interconnectedness. This knowledge also comes from a long observation of harmony within nature rather than dominion and domination over it like Shinra kind of practices. The idea of balance and consequences for breaking the balance feels very much like traditional teachings about living in reciprocity with the land. Furthermore, I find the music of the place to be very much in line with this thought process, as well as the visual design of Cosmo Canyon itself. Bugenhagen explains to us that if this balance were to be disturbed and the planet's energy were to be lost, the planet itself would crumble and die. This further solidifies our hero's kind of purpose and journey in that not only are they trying to defeat Sephiroth, but by doing so, they will be saving the planet itself. Around the bonfire at Cosmo Canyon, you can talk to many of the characters here, and it seems like everyone is going through some kind of crisis of belief, trying to figure out the reasons why they should truly fight and continue to carry on in this world that at times seems borderline hopeless. Even Aeris, the ever-hopeful kind of heir to the planet, is having trouble accepting and understanding her destiny. I also notice a subtle romantic undertone here where Cloud corrects himself and instead of saying, "I'm here for you," he says, "We're here for you." We also have this scene with Tifa. She says bonfires can make you remember all sorts of things, and she brings up Cloud's past, though he seems like he doesn't want to talk about it, and he says forget it. Tifa seems concerned that he's, quote, going really far away, aren't you? It seems like Tifa feels as though Cloud is drifting further and further into his delusion and is unable to accept his truth. We also have this conversation with Red XIII that will lead us to the next part of the game. He is essentially reminiscing on his past and how about when he thinks of his mother, he feels pride and joy, but when he thinks of his father, his heart is full of anger. Bugenhagen decides, I guess at this point, that it is time for Red XIII to learn the truth about his father, and we set off into a dungeon contained within Cosmo Canyon. After battling through the canyon and defeating many undead, we find out that the warrior who fought against the Gi who were assaulting the tribe was actually Seto, Red XIII's father. This is a massive revelation for Red XIII, who had gone his entire life believing that his father was a coward. Now it's been revealed to him that he was the last line of defense that protected their tribe. Red XIII lived his entire life believing that he was the last of his kind, and coupled with the shame that he felt attached to his father, he was someone that overcompensated by being serious, wise, and emotionally distant. When he finally learns this real story, that Seto stayed against all odds and was even turned to stone, the relief is overwhelming for him. It's not just that his dad wasn't a coward, it's that he's been carrying a false sense of shame his whole life that was never his to carry. After explaining this, Bugenhagen asks the others to leave and explains to Red XIII that he wants him to continue on with his friends. He believes that though it is a nearly impossible task, this could be the one chance that they have to truly save the planet, and in doing so, even honor the memory of Seto, who fought so bravely to protect their tribe. This was always, for me, one of the most emotionally charged sections of the entire game, and personally for me, it was the most emotionally charged section of the game. Red XIII realizing that much of the life perspective that he had been actually a lie, and then finally kind of finding his true purpose here, is just beautiful writing. When the tears start raining down from the statue, and Red XIII howls at the moon, I can't help but feel some tears welling up myself. This will forever be one of my favorite parts of the game, and I just can't help but kind of stand in awe of the amazing storytelling that Square Enix has pulled off here. We also come to Nibelheim and see that it is not burnt down. The party members even question Cloud as to whether or not he was lying to them. If you go around in the town and ask people about this, they also all will call you a liar. The cracks are certainly starting to show in Cloud's story here, and things get a bit more confusing from his perspective. We also find many of the black-caped figures, the kind of Sephiroth clones that Hojo had created in an attempt to kind of model Sephiroth again, but in a more controllable way. We also get our second ever sighting of Sephiroth, though it is a Jenova Sephiroth projection here, and Sephiroth mentions the Jenova reunion. My understanding of this is that all of Jenova's cells will attempt to recollect at one main point. Cloud, unknowingly, is enacting this kind of destiny as well. He is subconsciously drawn to Sephiroth because they share these same Jenova cells. I notice though that Sephiroth also says he doesn't think that Cloud has the right to participate. Perhaps this has something to do with the fact that you can read the experiment logbook in this place, and it tells you that Cloud, which I believe is the first subject, did not really take or absorb the Jenova cells as successfully as the other subjects did. I also find it telling that you get the destruct materia from the Sephiroth projection here. Sephiroth very much becomes the epitome of full-scale destruction, an evil, hell-bent madman who wants nothing more than to destroy the planet that is his home. After defeating the Materia Keeper and traveling through the mountainous back regions of Nibelheim, we come to Rocket Town, where we will be introduced to the character known as Cid. Cid is present in basically every Final Fantasy game, and I have to say my favorite interpretation and character of him is in Final Fantasy VII. I found him to be not quite as interesting or as enjoyable as a character in Final Fantasy VI, where he plays a pretty small role, and in Final Fantasy VIII as the headmaster of the school, I don't also find him all that interesting, but in 7 he is very interesting, has an interesting arc as well, and is also just a funny character to boot. I remember when I would be on the playground with my friends in elementary school and we would be pretending to be characters in the game, everyone wanted to be Cloud. I was the only one that wanted to be Cid. I loved Cid, and I still do to this day. Cid, like many a character in this game, also has a bone to pick with Shinra, given that they axed his space exploration program and essentially ruined his dream of being the first man in space. We also get an insight into Cid's character. While Cid may come off as a bit of a hardliner hard-ass who is very mean to Shera at times and seems to cut her basically no slack, he He also still shows that he has a heart when he, in the middle of the operation to launch, cancels it because he doesn't want her to be killed by the firing engines that she is currently working on. So, while Cid may be dubious at best in his demeanor and the way that he treats some of the people around him, which is sometimes quite rude, he certainly does have a heart and is nothing like the Shinra that he was working with, who will oftentimes readily sacrifice people in the name of profit. Shira realizes and understands this reality, that Cid made a great sacrifice for her, and so she says that she doesn't mind if he is quite rude to her at times. I find this to be a very human reaction. This is certainly the kind of thing that humans would do given this kind of same similar story in real life, in my opinion. Cid could certainly use a little bit more understanding. Shira was simply trying to ensure the success of the mission, placing her own life below his dreams even at times, and he will eventually come to this realization, though at this point in the game, he is hard stuck on basically hating her. The group manages to steal the tiny Bronco just under Shinra's nose, while Cid and Rufus are discussing the space program, and Rufus makes it clear that the space program isn't happening. Just as they manage to escape, they're hit in the tail and the tiny Bronco goes down and is mired in the water. Cid enjoys the moxie of our heroes going up against Shinra and says that he likes it, and since he is basically done with his old life, he is now going to join our party. Even though he is completely ignorant to our main mission of defeating Sephiroth, he doesn't really care. This is also where, against my better judgment, I went ahead and activated everyone's favorite part of the game, when Yuffie knocks you guys out and steals all of your materia. I'm gonna be honest, I don't have that many analytical themes to go into on Yuffie, as I've said before. I just personally don't find her that interesting of a character. Please don't get mad at me. I'm not saying it's not okay for you to like Yuffie. I'm saying that she never, to me, was all that interesting, and I didn't really get much out of her story, especially emotionally. It's just kind of, haha, I stole your materia, come chase me, okay, now you can have it back, and I feel like there isn't much more to it than that. We do also, though, get another glimpse into the Turks' kind of ethos, which is their mission is basically just a job, whereas our mission for our heroes is very much discovering who they are, finding out what their past and accepting their future kind of is. For the Turks, this is just a job, and this is supposed to be a vacation for them. One thing I will say about Yuffie, though, is that she is a great example of being defiant in the face of authority, which many of our other heroes also have to align with. So maybe we can learn something from this little rascal after all. She does chide her father here and say that he is scared of Shinra and that actually we are the ones that are fighting the bad guys. The rest of Wutai is a pretty goofy storyline. Corneo shows up and has kidnapped both Elena and Yuffie and is trying to decide which one he wants to pick, when suddenly our heroes and the Turks, kind of working in combination with each other, come through and save everyone. I'm not going to read into it too much, but maybe a small commentary on how sometimes in life you have to work with people that you don't exactly get along with if you want to get stuff done. Anyways, moving on from Wutai. When we first come to the Temple of the Ancients, Aeris seems to have some kind of moment where she is connecting with both the temple, the knowledge of the Ancients, and the planet itself, further illustrating just her special position that she holds as a Cetra. We also learn that we need a keystone in order to enter the temple, and witness a Sephiroth clone being sucked up into the air and blown away to who knows where. We also pay a visit to Underpants Man Dio, who helps the party greatly yet again by giving us access to the key for just simply partaking in the battle square. Where would the team be without this guy? First he gave us the buggy, which is hugely helpful and you need to progress, as well as the key to the Temple of the Ancients. We also end up laying out what our mission is, which is to essentially get rid of Sephiroth and find the Promised Land as well. Also, the black materia is mentioned as something that Sephiroth is after, and in fact, he will have Cloud hand-deliver it to him. You also then end up on your date with one of a few different characters based on what choices you made in the game. My date ended up being Aeris, even though in the playthrough I was really trying to get Barret to go on the date with me, though I didn't want to consult a guide on to do it, and apparently it's pretty tough to accomplish. We also have the very bittersweet moment of Cloud and Aeris on the gondola. The first thing I find interesting about this scene is that you're able to choose whether or not you want to look out the window and see the wondrous sights of the golden saucer, or you can simply stare ahead or stare down. I know this is ridiculous, but I even see his 3 different positions of staring as representations of what he is. One feels broken and depressed, perhaps the real him. The soldier version would simply stare ahead blankly. And another part of Cloud, the wondrous one, that wants to experience love and wants to experience all the great things in life, looks out the window. The gondola itself even feels like something metaphorical to me in this. These two are in this tight space. They are essentially interlinked, inextricably so in their destinies. And alas, despite their best efforts, they are both essentially on rails, acting out a destiny that seems almost predetermined for them in some way. Aeris is doing her best to get Cloud to look at the beautiful side of life. She also then makes the comparison between him and Zack. She finally realizes that her long-lost boyfriend essentially is Cloud in his mannerisms, the way he walks and gestures. She knows that she must have seen him inside of Cloud. Then we get the ultimate point in this scene, where it actually wraps up our previous theories, that Aeris knows that Cloud deep down is not representing himself truthfully. She says, "I want to meet you," and Cloud says, "I'm right here," and she says, "I want to meet the real you." From the very start of meeting in the church, I felt that Aeris saw through Cloud's persona basically immediately and cut through it. Though as unfortunate and tragic as it is, Aeris will never really get to meet the real Cloud, given that by the time that takes place, Aeris is no longer with us. Knowing what we do in hindsight of likely having played this game, I assume, since you're listening to the video, I would say it's also particularly brutal that she says, "Let's do this again sometime else." After exiting the gondola, we catch wind of Cait Sith's devious plan, and he flashes the keystone to the temple that he seems to have stolen from us, and a chase ensues. Cait Sith is a complicated character. While this is obviously not something that's going to help our heroes, I believe Cait Sith likely had to do it, because again, much like the other Shinra members, as I discussed around the tower in this video, are basically beholden to Shinra, even if they are Turks. If they disobey orders, it likely won't be good for them. Cait Sith at least makes up for this in many regards as the game progresses, and he does constantly kind of give you hints and clues on where to go to try and help. He even pulls the absolute bastard move of taking Marlene hostage, letting the group know that she is, and then forcing himself back into the party even though they want nothing to do with him. Reeve, who is piloting Cait Sith, I see being another example of a kind of split persona or a split personality. Reeve seems to have a pretty good heart, but he's also stuck in the monstrous machine that is Shinra. These two kind of goals are at odds with each other. I believe that he is essentially ordered to do everything that just happened, and though it makes the group hate him, he also probably believes that if he stays with them, he can at least help and redeem himself in some way. I also see some similarity between him and Sephiroth, just in the way that they're interacting in the world. Reeve is using a cat doll, essentially, that is remote controlled from wherever Reeve is, as a projection of himself. Sephiroth is also using Jenova in this very same kind of way. When we get to the temple, we realize that Sang has been stabbed, seemingly by Sephiroth, and that Sephiroth has left him to die. Upon realizing this, Aeris actually begins to break down and cry, because she says that even though he is someone who has been hounding her whole life, trying to turn her into Shinra, she still feels as though she is connected to him. He is one of the few people that she has actually known since childhood. He also furthers our team's cause by giving us a new keystone that we can place into the temple to get it to activate for us. Once again, it sends me back to the idea that the Turks are definitely not bad all around. They certainly do follow some pretty egregious orders, and those might be worth condemning them for, but still, they also help out sometimes when they can and when they think it's right. We also received the morph materia, which again I know is a huge stretch, but I see several morphings taking place in this place. For one, Aeris' kind of understanding and knowledge of the Ancient itself goes through a transformation. Cloud himself also morphs into essentially a puppet for Sephiroth at the end of this area. And finally, this will be a very large catalyst for sending Cloud on his way to gaining true understanding. We also then stop at the well of Ancient's knowledge, and Aeris says it is going to show us an evil consciousness that it is detecting. We are put into some kind of third-person omniscient view where we see Sang looking at the hieroglyphic-like pictures on the wall when suddenly Sephiroth appears. While we see this taking place in what could presumably only be the past, Sephiroth actually appears again to us and addresses us in this third-person view. Sephiroth has become the practically omnipresent and omnipotent god that he wishes to be. He also keys in here to essentially stealing autonomy from our characters by killing them and absorbing our energy. That is the very same thing that he will be doing shortly to Cloud. Believe it or not, I also find this clock to be significant. We are counting down essentially to an ultimate moment, a destiny that Cloud and Aeris are set on. Much like the gondola rails, there is no true way off. Whatever path they take leads them back to the clock. We also run into Sephiroth once we gain access to this room. Sephiroth says, "So cold, I am always by your side, come." To me, I see it almost as Sephiroth relating to Cloud that he knows the real Cloud, and he also knows the soldier persona that he is able to intimidate essentially. He wants the soldier persona to give in to his will. Sephiroth lays out his plan here to grievously injure the world. In doing so, large amounts of spirit energy will be released, which Sephiroth can then absorb and become that much more powerful. This is essentially the goal of Meteor for him. We also get this interesting key line which Sephiroth will repeat when he is kind of mind-controlling Cloud, and it has a bit of the same effect on here and sends Cloud into a bit of a state of madness. He says, "Wake up." And perhaps this is awakening something in Cloud like his true identity, one that is extremely broken and confused. Water is now also breaking through the dam that is Cloud's fake persona. He is seen here in a kind of freak-out mode, Sephiroth having almost controlled his mind completely and sent him into some mad spiral. He also says that he remembers his way and simply snaps back into his soldier kind of mannerisms and impersonation of Zack almost. We also get a decent redemption for Cait Sith here, though I'm not sure it would be entirely alleviating him of the bastard deeds that he's done, where he sacrifices the doll body in order to get the black materia for the group. We also get Cait Sith doing a bit of a star reading, and he says that Cloud and Aeris are perfect for each other, that their stars are perfectly aligned. I see this as almost pointing to them being actually kind of components for one another, catalysts for the other person to come into a way of self-realization and actualization of their destiny. As we know though, unfortunately, Aeris' destiny is a doomed one. After Cait Sith sacrifices his cat toy body, we get the black materia, and then suddenly something happens. Sephiroth appears, once again spouting his grandiose statements of how he has transcended the ancients and in fact every living being on this planet, and that he will destroy them all and gain their energy and become that much more powerful. He also once again hits Cloud with the "wake up," and Cloud collapses, leaving his younger self outside of his adult corporeal body. This is where Sephiroth, controlling Cloud as though he were simply some puppet, has Cloud give him the black materia. Cloud's younger self, his true self, can only stand by helplessly and watch as his adult body hands the materia to Sephiroth. He also then is sent into a bit of a blind rage and starts attacking Aeris, though I notice that right as this happened, the true self of Cloud, the kid version, pops out and is not associated with this kind of brutal attack that is happening. We also then get our last scene and last dialogue with Aeris, where she wishes Cloud well and says that she feels as though something is drawing her to the forest to the north. As the last remaining survivor of the Cetra, the last true remaining survivor, because while Sephiroth thinks that he is one, he has been led astray by Shinra documents and is not actually one, Aeris is the one that holds the true potential power and the ability to save the planet. By praying with the holy materia that she has had, she will summon essentially a force that will be able to potentially counter Meteor. And with that, we have Aeris' last goodbye to Cloud. As she walks away, Cloud attempts to chase after her, but is not able to gain any ground. Sephiroth also appears from nowhere, giving us an indication that he is on to what Aeris' plan is, and is even in the same vicinity as her. I feel as though Cloud may be even sensing somewhat the future that Aeris has. He says that Sephiroth already knows about her, and he feels as though it's almost impossible to go after her, and he's scared that if he does, that Sephiroth may control him again. Cloud is afraid to find out the truth, and he questions why. He is this much closer to being able to understand his true self, though he may not actually want to. Likely because his true self is a pitiable one. He did not accomplish his ambitions and dreams of becoming an S-class soldier, and he also is unable to really protect the people that he loves, as will be illustrated here coming up. While resting in the city of the ancients, Cloud says that he has a kind of sixth sense feeling, a feeling in his soul that he knows Sephiroth and Aeris are here. This is all building up to one final climax point. We find Aeris deep in the temple, and Cloud is suddenly, again, seemingly mind-controlled by Sephiroth, who is attempting to make Cloud kill her himself. I feel like the reason he wants to do this is because if he could pull it off, this would almost certainly break Cloud beyond all repair. But Cloud is thankfully able to resist in the moment. Just then, one of the most famous scenes in all of gaming history takes place. I remember this was absolutely gut-wrenching the first time that I experienced it as a kid. Sephiroth shows here to Cloud that he is truly powerless at this moment. He cannot protect the people that he loves, and with one fell swoop, he takes away Aeris, the one hope that the planet had had. The hope for life, the beauty that Aeris represented, is taken away as there is no place for it in Sephiroth's world. He has also eliminated the real competition, the one person who could actually counter his darkness, Aeris. With that, the holy materia, her last kind of remaining hope, flies from her hair. And although Aeris' light has been extinguished forcefully and brutally by Sephiroth, the one hope that still remains, the holy materia, bounces off of the steps and falls down into these waters. To me, it signifies that though Aeris has died, she has left behind something beautiful, a legacy of love, kindness, generosity, an acceptance of dark times, and a will to work through them. It also, of course, causes a surge of emotion in Cloud. He tells Sephiroth to shut up with all of his grandiose planet nonsense and simply describes his feeling, though Sephiroth says that you do not have feelings and don't pretend that you do. An interesting line that was pointed out to me here is that as Sephiroth floats into the air and says that Cloud, you are ... and then the Jenova battle takes place, after the battle, Jenova is actually the one that says, a puppet. It's likely one of the most distinct and devastating lines of the entire game, illustrating that Cloud has essentially been having his strings pulled by other forces. Was everything a complete lie? The soldier persona manifesting and forcing him to chase after Sephiroth as some kind of mad obsession. His growing feelings for Aeris even. Are these all simply machinations of the Jenova cells inside of him, forcing him to do this, to enact this destiny? This is at least the way that Sephiroth wants to paint it in Cloud's mind, so that he can have full dominion and control over what is essentially his greatest threat. He may even remember very well that Cloud is the one that actually thwarted him while he was in control of his real body, and now is attempting to dominate and control that threat. But I don't think that Cloud was entirely driven by simply Jenova cells or Sephiroth's will, nor do I think that all of his feelings and emotions were completely dependent on those two things. I think there absolutely was the real Cloud underneath all of this that still developed all of those feelings, had all of those thoughts, and is the one here that lays Aeris to her final resting place. All I can think of at this point is that it truly is a shame that Aeris never got to see the real Cloud, the Cloud that knows and accepts himself for who he is and what his past is. But maybe there's some part of her that knew him all along. And even though all of this has taken place, Cloud is still convinced of his ex-soldier identity, as we will see here. He says that he is ex-soldier born in Nibelheim, and though he thought he came here on his own free will, he is afraid of the truth, the part of him that was able to be controlled by Sephiroth. But it seems that Aeris' death has also allowed him some phase of rebirth. He understands that there is a part of him that is not truly him, and this could be the first stepping stone that he has to take in order to gain true self-understanding. After Aeris' death, we eventually go to a town on a snowy hill, we do a snowboard minigame all the way down, and we end up in this cold, lost kind of wasteland. To me, it actually feels like a thematic fit. Aeris has just been killed. Our team is scrambling to pick up the pieces and to continue to chase Sephiroth, though ultimately he has shown that he is basically all-powerful in the current state of things. In one action, Sephiroth was able to take away someone that Cloud loved, a ray of hope and light, and now all that is left is wandering a cold wasteland bereft of hope. After battling our way through the snowy wasteland, we eventually come to the crater itself, where it seems to me that Sephiroth's full power is on display. His ability to manipulate is at an all-time high. We also get some information as far as Sephiroth when he says this is the end of this body's usefulness. It's almost as though he's saying he understands that the time is near, and Cloud also gets an inner monologue kind of message that says we must deliver the black materia to Master. Cloud also gets out some of this phrase verbally. He says our ... and then turns around and says master to the party as well, but not before also recalling a line that has to do with Genova cells, likely about their influence and their will to congregate. As sad as it is, this close to Sephiroth's influence in his current mental state, of which he is very vulnerable and unsure of himself, Cloud very much is a puppet in Sephiroth's hands. The Genova Sephiroth projection appears once again, seemingly knocks our heroes out, but then turns around and we have yet another fight with Genova in the crater. Sephiroth's power is so strong here that it can even reach people who do not have any Genova cells in their body and have no kind of fixation or obsession with Sephiroth. We give the black materia that we just got from defeating Genova to Red XIII, who promises to hold on to it for us. While traveling through the crater, suddenly Nibelheim the town materializes and our heroes find themselves inside of it, though Cloud seems keen on understanding that this is all a trick from Sephiroth, an illusion that he has created, though what Sephiroth is showing is actually the truth of what happened many years ago. The truth that Tifa was scared to tell Cloud, Sephiroth is now showing, because he knows that it will break him essentially. Sephiroth is the master of mental manipulation, and though he is even showing Cloud the truth here, Cloud is actually in denial the whole time and is unwilling to accept it, asking Tifa oftentimes, is this true? I know it's a huge stretch, but I even see this laughter that Sephiroth does as maybe some kind of in-the-moment thing that, though it happened in the past, is actually keyed into what is taking place here. The laughter that Sephiroth did those years ago in Nibelheim also being possibly some strange kind of echo relating to this actual moment where Cloud is in denial and is unwilling to accept the truth, the past that Sephiroth is showing him here. Tifa says she doesn't want to watch this, and she says, Cloud, don't watch. To me, it shows that Tifa is reliving the actual events as they happened back then, and that is probably painful for her, given that she actually went through this and recognizes it perhaps even as the real thing. Sephiroth asks Cloud if he finally understands, and Cloud even says, I don't want to understand. Sephiroth then tells a manipulative lie to Cloud that he was created by Hojo 5 years ago after the fire at Nibelheim. And though Cloud does try to rely on Tifa here by saying remember the nights that we spent together and the childhood that we shared, Tifa doesn't outright say that it's all completely true. In fact, Sephiroth alludes to that Tifa is hiding something, and this begins to cast doubt into Cloud's mind. While Cloud is attempting to grapple with the reality versus the fiction that he has built up in his mind, Sephiroth then shows him the one final piece that basically causes him to break. The picture that was taken of Cloud, at least in his memory, when he visited Nibelheim, but instead, standing there in his spot is Zack. After this, he questions, how was I able to join Soldier? When did I join Soldier? These questions and the fact that he can't remember send him into a complete spiral, and he fully, at this point, becomes Sephiroth's puppet. Shinra is also on the scene, trying to make use of the Mako that is gathered here in the crater, but while doing so, the planetary defense systems, the weapons, awaken. Another illustration that the planet itself is more of an organic entity than one might think at first glance. It even has a built-in kind of defense system. I always thought the idea of the weapons was extremely cool, that these things, big monsters essentially, come out when the planet is in danger in an attempt to defend it. We also have another sly deception perpetrated by Sephiroth. He is able to essentially take on the form of Tifa, as he has explained previously that Jenova allows one to be able to change form when they want to, and he convinces Red 13 to go give the black materia back to Cloud, who is now in the crater center. This will be the final piece needed to get Cloud to give the black materia to Sephiroth, acting as his complete and total puppet. However, I noticed a few specific lines of dialogue. For one, the real Cloud seems to break through, and he says, "I am sorry for what I've done." He apologizes directly to Tifa, and even says, "One day I hope you get to meet the real Cloud." This is absolutely devastating for Tifa. As she breaks down, she realizes that all this time it has not been the real Cloud. The soldier identity is taken over, and is now being completely controlled by Sephiroth. Cloud has even completely bought into the lie that he is essentially a creation by Hojo. He asks his master to give him a number here, and instead Hojo calls him a miserable failure. It is at this point that Cloud's will is completely broken. He ascends suddenly into the air, seemingly under the effect of Jenova Sephiroth, and Hojo finally expounds on the Jenova theory, the theory that Jenova cells and Mako will all attempt to gather in one spot. He at first assumed it would be Midgar, but this seems to be a stronger pull spot for these cells. There also seems to even be some glimpse that Cloud gets of true understanding given all of this, that he was in fact manipulated and almost forced to be obsessed by Sephiroth, and that he couldn't figure it out either, that he himself was lost in all of this. And with that, Cloud simply gives the black materia to Sephiroth, completing the kind of long journey that he has been on, although unknowingly all of this time. This causes the area to collapse and the weapons are freed. I feel like this makes sense, given that now Sephiroth has essentially been resurrected in a new, powerful form. The weapons come out. These are the one planet defense system that exists as a natural kind of state. We also get this scene where Tifa seems to be running after Cloud and trying to reach him in some way. Though Cloud is unreachable, he is still actually ensconced in the soldier persona, I think, which is signified by the blade that he is holding, and he simply walks away. Tifa says that she didn't know what to do and that she was always like that. I guess leaning back to that she didn't feel that she could tell him the truth and was kind of hit with indecision when she discovered Cloud, as we see in this flashback here. She realized something was certainly wrong with him, but she didn't know how to quite handle it. Even the dialogue here and Cloud's mannerisms, saying "that's right, I'm Cloud," and holding his sword, feels almost juvenile and kid-like to me, like he is essentially almost a blank slate at this point. This is when Tifa lets on that she knows far more than she has actually told Cloud. She says it's actually been 7 years and that she knows he joined Soldier but quit after the Sephiroth incident and now he is a mercenary. Tifa says that she wanted Cloud to join Avalanche so that she could keep an eye on him, as she was worried about seeing him in this mentally broken state, and that maybe at some point later she could attempt to smooth things over and get Cloud to realize the truth. Though I'm not sure that I entirely agree with this take and the action. In fact, I think if you were to look at it as a real-world scenario, you may be doing more harm than good by prolonging the delusion for this person. But that is just my personal take on it. We also get the startling reveal that Meteor has been summoned and is now bearing down on the planet. Shinra has of course also placed all of the blame on Avalanche and is going to publicly execute their members now that they are holding captive. Just at the point of execution though, suddenly an alert goes out saying that the weapon is approaching the harbor and everyone goes into full emergency mode. Kate Sith is also able to get another redemptive moment and tries to help the team save themselves. With the weapon fast approaching, Shinra is powering up its main gun in an attempt to defend their harbor. At the same time, Tifa has been placed in what is essentially a gas chamber for the execution, with the gas slowly pumping into the room. Barret and Cait Sith scoop up Yuffie along the way, who was impersonating a reporter, and they head for the airship. I know this is a ridiculous take that I'm about to say, but just hear me out. The weapon fires one single shot off in the time that it has. Where does the shot land? It lands where one of the heroes who could enable the future and save the planet is being incarcerated currently. Now, I don't know, maybe the weapons are generally unintelligent beasts that will just attack wildly. That could certainly be the case. But what if the weapon somehow understands that freeing Tifa, who is instrumental in essentially freeing Cloud from his delusion and getting him to realize his real self, which he then goes on to eventually save the planet, is actually all part of the plan? Maybe it used its one shot that it had in the time that it had to ensure that this could happen. Destroying Shinra is one thing, and while I'd say they certainly are a threat to the planet, Sephiroth is the much greater threat. If the weapons are an intelligent planet defense system, then perhaps they somehow understand and know that these heroes are the key to saving the planet, and so it assists them in the only way that it can. I'm also incredibly proud to say that I thankfully on stream did not lose the slap fight. If I had lost the slap fight on stream, I think I would have had to quit streaming and never shown my face anywhere else ever again. After beating Scarlet triumphantly in the slap fight, Tifa makes a run for it and jumps and just barely escapes the clutches of Shinra. The team is also feeling quite lost at this point as to what exactly do. They all reminisce about how Cloud would always have a plan and tell someone what to do in the cocky way that he would. They unfortunately are without a real leader right now, and Tifa assumes that role for the time being. Upon entering the village at Mideel, we get wind of a pokey-headed thing that washed up on the beach, and everyone says they are feeling sad for the kid, but he has these weird blue eyes. This alerts Tifa instantly into thinking that Cloud is here, and while he may be injured, he is very likely still able to talk and converse, and she may have found him. One of the things that I find most interesting in this scene is actually the sudden switch of music that takes place. Tifa might have assumed that though Cloud was maybe injured in this, that he would still at least be able to talk and converse with her. I don't think she was expecting that he would be in a totally incapacitated mental state. The way that the music here suddenly changes when she realizes this in the game is to me a very real life kind of feeling that one might have. If someone got into a horrible accident, you might say, if you went to the hospital expecting to see them, although hurt, still able to converse with you in some way, and discovered instead the horrifying reality that they were completely unable to communicate with you or interact with their environment in any way, this would be a terrible realization, and the track itself is even called Off the Edge of Despair. To me, the music illustrates the plodding monotony that a life like this that Cloud would be living would be truly terrible, and this realization is completely crushing to Tifa, of course. We also get a direct reference to hope for Cloud's recovery, though Barret seems that honestly he doesn't think anything is going to happen, and he basically writes off Cloud as good as dead here, calling him nothing more than Sephiroth's shadow. We also, thanks to Cait Sith, get to eavesdrop on the current Shinra meeting where they are planning to both destroy the barrier around the North Crater as well as blow up Meteor by putting materia into a rocket and then shooting it at Meteor. And so the race for the huge materia is on. With Sid being elected as the new leader of the party, we go to the Corel reactor and we see a train that we assume the huge materia is being carted off on. I always found the train sequence to be pretty fun, though when you get to the end and it gives you commands to try and slow the train down, I always had a really hard time even getting just a pull or two out of these commands. I don't know, I guess I was doing it wrong. Thankfully though, if you're able to get off just one or two turns of the handle, you will be able to slow the train down enough in time to save Corel. This also acts as a decent redemptive arc for Barret, where he essentially gets to save the town that he initially feels he destroyed, and we also end up picking the huge materia. We also take place in the Fort Condor final battle, this time for all the marbles, and we save it, and then a baby phoenix hatches and flies off. It to me has some kind of rebirth theme, which we are about to also quite literally get, with Cloud having his own mental kind of rebirth and revitalization. We also have a battle with Ultima Weapon, one of several battles that we'll have with him, and I'm not sure really that my theory holds water very much that I said earlier about the weapons maybe wanting to directly assist the people that are going to save the world, and this makes me think that they are more just kind of beasts acting on natural instinct. Like I said at the top of the video, I realize that many of the theories that I extrapolate on this are likely wrong. I did not look up the lore online and then just put it into a video. I went through my own playthrough and then thought up what I could in the moment. This is where Tifa, with Cloud in tow, makes a run for it and tries to get out of the town. However, the ground cracks and they are sent deep down into the lifestream. This is where Cloud will begin his journey of self-discovery and realize the truth that lies within him, but only with the help of Tifa. Something that I just thought of relating to the weapon that is equal parts crazy and equal parts crackpot is that what if the weapon actually orchestrated this on purpose? Look at it this way, if Cloud had never been sent into the lifestream this way with Tifa, then he actually would have probably never come to the realizations that he does, that enable him to grab his destiny, feel that he has control of his character, and then go on to save the world. I know it's completely ridiculous, but that's all I've got. Tifa somehow recognizes immediately that she is essentially in Cloud's subconscious, where Cloud is searching for the answers to who and what he really is regarding his past and his true temperament and person. The first thing that is associated with this, I believe, is the strongest part of the story and the one that Cloud has had the most difficulty grappling with, his soldier identity. Cloud very obviously, as stated earlier in the game, wanted to become a soldier, so much so that it was very much his life's ambition. Falling short of this was a crushing defeat to him. Him being able to confront it here is the first and very likely largest step towards gaining the true understanding of his self that he so desires. Tifa is able to share her perspective, that she waited for the real Cloud to show up, but he never did. When she saw Sephiroth and some other soldier that she didn't recognize, she actually runs away. Though Cloud is seemingly having trouble accepting the answer here, Tifa says that there's nothing that she can say and that he must find the answer for himself. I also noticed that Cloud's line of dialogue here do not actually have a name attached to them as they usually do when a person is talking in this game. Perhaps this is also a subtle narrative nod to that Cloud's identity is still not completely intact. It is being reformed and he doesn't even quite know what to think of himself as here. Here we have the retrospective on the well, the real memories, the childhood memories that Tifa and Cloud share, and it becomes apparent to Cloud that these are in fact real memories, helping him believe that he was not in fact a creation of Hojo, but a real child with a real upbringing. I also really enjoy how many of the mannerisms that Tifa in the adult form does here also match and line up with the child form of Tifa at the same time. I find it interesting that they're both also doing essentially the same thing, just in different places in time. The Tifa back then is attempting to get some understanding of Cloud, to see who he is, what his ambitions are, and also talk to him on a more personal level. That very same thing is happening now in this subconscious kind of revisitation episode that's taking place. We also get here the final piece of the puzzle. Cloud says, "I was devastated. I wanted to be noticed," and that was the true impetus for why he joined Soldier. Going all the way back to the very start of the video, more or less, where I said that a lot of what I think his motivation to join Soldier for was to impress the girls in his life, to try and find love in some way, by proving to be strong and valuable. What is shown to Cloud here is that he very much felt as though he was on the outside of the friend group here. He felt as though he was an outcast, so it was an easy decision for him to be able to leave this all behind and go off and become something greater. Possibly in his mind then, he could return full of pride and success and accomplishment, which might be attractive to someone like Tifa. Cloud's almost shadow self seems to appear here, and he tells Tifa a dark secret, that he always kind of doubted himself. Though, Tifa contrasts this in that Tifa actually believed in Cloud and saw the good in him and believed that he could do something great. Cloud viewed himself as an outsider, so he took an outsider path. This once again reminds me that belief is a very strong kind of guiding force in many people's lives. There is an old saying that goes, "Your belief limits your actions," and I find that to be extremely true in my own real life, and also it is evident and illustrated in this game. This is also where we get a flashback to their childhood, and this is an actually accurate one. Tifa has just recently lost her mother. Feeling lost and distraught, she heads into the dangerous kind of mountainous paths behind the town. There, all of the other kids are too scared to follow her, but one kid is not, and that is Cloud. They both make it to the bridge, but Tifa has an unfortunate accident and falls below. Cloud, though, does not get hurt more than scraped knees, while Tifa ends up in a coma. I imagine Cloud also has some kind of survivor's guilt attached to this. This caused Cloud to go down a troubled past. Ever since then, he felt Tifa had blamed him. He went out of control, and he would get into fights with anyone. And that was also the first time that he heard about Sephiroth, which is likely when he began modeling himself after these ideal soldier figures to try and impress Tifa and impress the world, and even prove to himself that he was capable. We also return to the Mako reactor scene, and this is the final culminating event that allows Cloud to finally reclaim his identity. We see Zack enter the scene, and he challenges Sephiroth, though he is easily defeated and smacked onto the incubators for whatever it is that Shinra has been making, these kind of Genova-infused soldiers. After this, we see a figure appear, and it is none other than Cloud in the blue grunt Shinra uniform. Cloud grabs the Buster Sword and runs Sephiroth through. I notice the one thing that points out to me that Sephiroth says is, "Who are you?" That is specifically what Sephiroth's projection says to Cloud the first time that they meet face to face in the cargo hold of the ship that is heading to Costa del Sol. This realization is what finally affirms Cloud's self-identity and belief, knowing that although he fell short of his soldier goals, which he was ashamed of, he at least still fought back against Sephiroth, the all-powerful being, the one that he admired so much, and the one that caused so much destruction to occur in his life. Cloud is the one that fought back against him, and even basically ends up killing him here. And much like Aeris uses her wounds to become stronger, so does Cloud. Cloud is grievously injured here, impaled by Sephiroth, but still he finds the strength to take his wound and turn it into power. He casts Sephiroth down into the Mako energy, and in doing so, I see him destroying a monster, but also inadvertently creating an even greater one at the same time. Because Sephiroth is holding Genova's head here, I assume that this is what caused the two of them to essentially fuse in the livestream. Little did Cloud know that this fact would eventually come back to haunt him as it does now. And with that, the three aspects of Cloud merge to form one greater being. The broken aspirations that he had, his shame of falling short of becoming a soldier, though redeeming himself by his fight against Sephiroth. The tender feelings that he has for Tifa, their childhood memories together, and finally, Cloud's feeling of always being an outcast and not being good enough. These three troubled sides of him all merge at once into one full, complete being, with understanding of his past failures and triumphs, and an understanding of what his future should be. And with that, our heroes ascend from the livestream and rejoin their rightful place amongst the saviors of the planet. Tifa also says this line, which, while it may be a throwaway, I actually think has a pretty profound significance. It goes for many things in real life, not just simply this game world. As we've said, belief is a common limiting factor in people's lives, and this is a true thing, not just for video game characters, but for real people as well. I feel like this game, at its core, is about not letting your past define you, and even if it does, being able to grow from it instead of wilting under the pressure. Also, people basically just get the wrong idea a lot of times. They might be operating on a skewed perspective, and this can massively change outcomes in their life. I can even speak on how I've personally done this very thing. I might have had a more negative opinion of myself at one time or another, and it has actually cost me opportunities because I felt I wasn't quite up to match with whatever it was I was trying to do. Final Fantasy VII is a game about belief, about using hope even in the worst of times to overcome what seem to be insurmountable odds. Cloud fully acknowledges now his faults and shortcomings, and he understands that at the time he was weak. He was basically willed by Sephiroth into doing his bidding, but now that he has a full understanding, he is able to take control of his destiny and claim his future. I would like to take a second now and genuinely and sincerely thank you if you have made it this far. Much like Cloud, I am honestly pretty terrified of the future, specifically for this video. My main concern is that people are going to act as though I'm trying to make grand claims about lore that is already well established, when really I'm just giving a personal reflection on it. When it comes to this video, I'm not quite sure what to think of it, and when I look back and review it, I honestly don't know how to feel about it. This is one of the most important games of my entire life, and I feel like no matter what I do, I would never feel like I have quite done the game justice on any kind of retrospective analysis. I am not an expert at this stuff, and frankly, I feel like most of my life, much like Cloud, has been me bumbling from opportunity to opportunity and never being able to quite get what I wanted out of it most of the time. The one time I had success was an offshoot with Silent Hill 2, and I think it was mostly due to timing. There isn't a whole lot left to analyze in this game, though we will continue on from this point and I will analyze what I can. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time if you have. I really do appreciate it. And now to continue with the rest of our video. After bumbling around on the Gelnica and getting some items, we eventually come to the next story beat, which is they are trying to launch the Shinra rocket at Meteor with the huge materia on it in an attempt to blow up Meteor. I always just enjoyed this because Sid finally gets to live out his dream of being the first man in space. If I was to apply some grade school analysis to this, I would come up with that never give up on your dreams, because even though it may happen later in life, even though you may be completely unprepared for it, you never know what twists and turns life has to offer you. And with that, Sid gets to blast off and become the first ever human to travel into space. One thing I found kind of funny is that a lot of the houses get completely destroyed by the blast wave here, and it made me think, yeah, isn't this actually a terrible spot for a launch pad? There's literally an active town right by it. Leave it to Shinra, I guess, to accomplish their big goals while the little guy gets crapped on. What a surprise. Sid is also able to gain some personal redemption here. He is trapped under some debris and our two heroes are unable to move it. He also then says in this moment that he realizes that Shero was right all along. Tank number 8 is the one that Shero is working on, and it is in fact the tank that blew up. Sid seems to be feeling some regret perhaps for the way that he treated Shera, but at this moment, the final moment, she shows up to save him, very much like he saved her. Sid even manages to muscle out a faint sorry to Shera. Unfortunately, much to the chagrin of everyone on the planet, Meteor is not destroyed by the huge materia rocket. In fact, it's basically just cracked a little bit, but still heading on its destructive course towards the planet. We also get an inspiring speech from Sid, where he says that the planet is like a sick kid and that someone has to protect it. After this, we take a quick stop off at Bugenhagen's laboratory, where he preaches the importance of self-examination and self-reflection. Final Fantasy VII is very much a game that is pinned on this idea of self-reflection being one of the most important things for human beings. If you have no self-awareness, then how can you ever grow or adjust course? Cloud during the entire game, and many of the other characters, are avoiding this one primary factor, and it is only once they do this that they are able to accept their fate, understand their past, and then choose their destiny. We also then figure out that Holy, the ultimate white magic, is what Aeris was doing with her final moments. She put out a prayer seeking Holy and helping it to reach the planet. It is the one thing that could perhaps save our team from Meteor and save the world itself. This one final virtuous act of Aeris may actually be the salvation for all of humankind on the planet in Final Fantasy VII, and it makes absolute sense that she would be the one to deliver it, being this beacon of hope, humility, and a will to survive. Based on what Cloud says here, I think that Aeris may even have known that it was going to cost her her life to expose herself, to pray when she needed to, and to essentially give her life in order to save the planet. But that is exactly the kind of virtuous sacrifice that Aeris would make. I know that I've been harping a lot on the weapons kind of inadvertently assisting our heroes as part of a larger, grander scheme, and I know that canonically that is not actually correct. But if I didn't know that, then I would be able to possibly see how this weapon would be positioning itself in a way that the gun shoots, kills it, but also opens the crater. Even though we know that Shinra was aiming at the crater, this is one aim I came up with for how the weapon could be assisting. I know it's a crazy theory, but if I put on my tinfoil hat, I can actually find a way to see that all of these weapons are actually assisting our heroes in the long run. It also taps into the Aeris-like vein of being willing to self-sacrifice for the greater good, which, if I think of these as planetary defense creatures, which they are supposed to be is my understanding in the lore, and if they are at all intelligent, which I actually don't think is too much of a stretch to think, it actually all makes perfect sense to me that these weapons would be essentially self-sacrificing themselves in order to give our heroes some leeway and get them into the crater so they can defeat Sephiroth and save the world itself. The first weapon could have attacked anywhere it wanted in the Shinra base, but where it attacked was specifically where Tifa, an instrumental hero in getting Cloud to realize his self and be actuated and able to defeat Sephiroth, was, and it freed her. The second one sent us into the depths of the lifestream, and though it was a tumultuous and dangerous process, it led to our heroes once again self-actualizing and gaining the power and the freedom and the will to defeat Sephiroth. This weapon also coincidentally at the same time takes out the current head of Shinra, a madman bent on ruling the world with fear. So he essentially got two birds with one stone, he just had to trade his life for it. We also have the completely mad scientist Hojo, who is overloading the reactors in an attempt to draw out Sephiroth. He wants to see his grand creation one last time before the city is completely destroyed, and I guess the world. Our heroes James Bond their way into Midgard, jumping off of the Highwind with parachutes attached, and they quickly and quite easily destroy the proud Claude and Scarlet and Heidegger along with Hojo. This all succinctly and rather quickly wraps up the Shinra chapter of the game. All of Shinra's heads have basically been cut off at this point, and the only remaining villain is, you guessed it, Sephiroth. I'd also like to point out though that on the way here you get one final battle available with the Turks if you choose to do so. I view this as a Cloud agency kind of choice. No longer is he stuck between two different personality types. Both of the answers here seem very Cloud to me, and it seems like you can simply make a choice to either not fight them or to fight them. They are, as usual, the kind of reluctant bad guys, and they seem just as willing as you, if you want to duck out of the fight. This is also where our heroes put a bit of a stake in the ground, and they have a conversation amongst each other that if they are going to continue doing this and to end it, then they all have to be fighting for their own personal reason. This is a common theme among soldiers throughout history. I've listened to many a historical memoir, and soldiers are not fighting for their generals or the greater cause typically. They're fighting to go home and see their loved ones, or they're fighting to save their buddies' lives. Having a great grand plan and design is all well and good, but when the rubber hits the road, if you're really going to fight, you need to have something personal that is pushing you. Cloud further illustrates that point here. He wants all of the adventurers to go home and think, truly think about what it is that they are fighting for, and if they can't come up with anything, then he encourages them not to return, because this battle is fit only for people that truly do have something to fight for. Tifa and Cloud spend the night on a bluff awaiting the return of their friends, though they are unsure if they will come back, and they at least resolve that no matter what, they will fight together at the very least. A beautiful moment is had when just before the ultimate battle, Tifa says that she wants to wait just a little bit longer with Cloud, and that she'll never get this time back. At first, our two heroes think that they've been abandoned and they resolve to fight anyways, but upon returning to the ship, they realize that they were wrong and that all of their friends are right behind them in this epic final battle. I did have just one last thing to wrap up though before I went to the crater and fought Sephiroth. I went to the Shinra mansion and I saw this interesting cutscene that I think I had only seen a time or two before and basically forgot entirely. It basically tells the story of Zack and Cloud just before the events that took place in the game happened. It shows them suspended in some kind of Mako retention pod, and they're being likely infused with Genova cells as well. They are able to break out and then kind of go on the lam on their own. This is also when Zack unfortunately gets murdered by Shinra soldiers. I find it interesting that Zack, much like Aeris, dies attempting to protect someone or something. This is essentially Cloud's Genesis story as well. He is heavily influenced by the Mako poisoning here. He picks up the Buster Sword, and then our game practically starts off from this point. The two deaths, though, are very dissimilar from each other. Aeris dies in an almost ritualistic fashion perpetrated by Sephiroth, which is a pinpointed kind of target. Zack's death feels much more random, though, almost. He is simply gunned down on a muddy, runny hill with the disgusting kind of bleak city landscape in the back. We also meet Vincent, who was in the past a Turk, and much like the Turks, he has done some pretty terrible things in his life, but he also has a good heart most of the time. I believe that Vincent loved Lucretia, who is Sephiroth's birth mother, and he knew her while she was alive. He also feels that he has to avenge her memory in some way, so Sephiroth is a natural target for him. Maybe not from Sephiroth personally wronging him, but as we see in this flashback, Vincent is essentially damned to eternal life and to live with the horrible burden that he has because a Shinra scientist operated on him and turned him into what he is. So, by striking back at Sephiroth, he is essentially striking back at the ethos that created Sephiroth, the ungodly kind of experimentation that Shinra did on people like him, people like Sephiroth, and the monster that they created in doing so. When we encounter Lucretia in this cave, which what I can only assume is a kind of Genova-fueled ghost of her, she wants to know if Sephiroth is alive. When Cloud goes to answer, Vincent says, "No, Sephiroth is dead." I believe this to be truly accurate given that the Sephiroth that Lucretia may have known or would have known truly is dead. The Sephiroth that Cloud knew, and the Sephiroth that everyone else knew before his mental transformation is long gone. It has been basically co-opted by Genova's cells and his new god complex into something far, far more sinister and terrifying. While in the crater, we battle Genova's synthesis, and this is the last kind of Genova true form that we will see. After this, everything that we see is an amalgamation of Genova and Sephiroth's cells together. After this, we encounter Sephiroth and all of his insane power. He's able to move our characters around like ragdolls, and the final battle commences. For one, I find Bizarro Sephiroth's construction very interesting. It feels like it is almost an incomplete project to me. There is a core in the middle with several strange appendages attached to it as well. Sephiroth himself seeming to be mired in some kind of head-like appendage near the top. I'm not sure entirely what to make of it, but perhaps this is Sephiroth in his half-baked form before he was able to reach true godhood, and our heroes may have gotten there just in time to try and stop him. Perhaps this is the ugly reality behind his perfect and godlike villain persona that exists. I see this as being possibly the true form of Sephiroth as we do not know it. We have seen only a projected villain image, one that is austere, put together, diabolical, and clever at every turn. But the truth of it, the ugliness behind it, is what we see here in Bizarro Sephiroth. It also, to me, mirrors his character arc in that Sephiroth goes through a monstrous transformation, and what we see before us is nothing like the perfect god that Sephiroth claims himself to be. And though after we defeat him, we are presented with a nearly divine image, there are some things that I would like to point out that have struck me particular regarding Safer Sephiroth's design. For one, he is known as the one-winged angel. I see this as him essentially being incomplete. Also, I find it interesting that historically, biblical depictions always have the person raising their right hand, a sign of their virtue, their ability to see the truth. Notice, though, that Sephiroth's right hand is the dark wing, and he is holding up his left hand. He is essentially impersonating a false godhood that he believes himself to be. His design is very much that of still half a man and the other half being some winged creature. So, Sephiroth was not able to ever really attain his true godlike form. This is merely a presentation, a manifestation of his ego. Sephiroth's belief in himself that he is a true god. The progression from one form to the other could show Sephiroth's hubris. Even though he failed in his demonic, grotesque form, he reshapes himself into this fractured image of what an angel could be, though his black wing is telling in that he is not truly angelic. He is not truly godlike. His presentation here merely aligns with his grandiose beliefs, but his rise, or ascension to what he considers godhood, has been marred by generally terribleness all along the way. Murder, deceit, and betrayal. And therein we have the core of Sephiroth's true corrupted character. He, like Cloud at one point, believes himself to be something that he is not, though he is unable to accept this truth like Cloud eventually does for himself. This creates the disparity and nigh uncrossable gap that now exists between this protagonist and antagonist. Our protagonist has collapsed in on himself and been reborn anew, accepting his past and enabling his future. Our antagonist, though, is forever caught in the past, believing a lie, an erroneous truth that he adopted and molded himself into, much like Cloud, though he was never able to accept the real truth of his birth, which was of natural origin, and his actual power limit, which is that of simply a human infused with Mako cells. And here we come to the penultimate final blow that we deliver to Sephiroth that sends him hurtling into the abyss, exploding into a large burst of light. And though it seems that the day is won and the battle is over, it is not yet over for Cloud. It seems that somehow Sephiroth has persisted in some way, perhaps simply in Cloud's mind. Cloud is sent through a tunnel where many of the sounds and visuals that we have seen before in the game play before him. Cloud opens his eyes to see, for the last time, the one true villain standing before him, Sephiroth, and he must defeat him in whatever this is. I think it might be the inner kind of workings of his mind, and then he can finally be free of his influence. What Sephiroth is likely not ready for, though, is that this is the true Cloud, the Cloud that has accepted his past and has settled now with his future. In this final battle, he unleashes Omni Slash on Sephiroth and sends him hurtling into the abyss once and for all. The red blood dripping down, the expression of shock on his face, all read as distinctly human. A man who thought he had attained godhood, but fell short and was devoured by his own hubris. With Sephiroth defeated, the livestream suddenly begins to swirl around Cloud. He looks around quizzically at the scintillating colors before him, and he questions. Although I can't help but feel that Cloud actually recognizes what this energy is, and it seems to protect him in some way, and even blossom from him. If the livestream is the representation of everything that has come and passed in this world, then perhaps it could be Aeris. We even then see a disembodied hand reaching out to him. I'd like to think that this hand has many different representations. For one, it is Aeris reaching out to protect Cloud, to bring him back into the real world, and at the same time, it is also Tifa's hand, the reliable childhood friend who has stuck by him through thick and thin, and is reaching out to him also in the physical world. We also get this line that Cloud delivers to Tifa saying, "I think I'm beginning to understand." Tifa questions him, and he says, "An answer from the planet." Cloud has maybe gained a true understanding of the livestream and what the afterlife essentially is in this game. He seems at peace with her death, accepting it even, and understanding that one day he may be able to see her there again. There, of course, not being a physical place, but the essence of the livestream itself. I also find it fitting that Meteor seems to be coming down right on top of the center of corruption and greed that has existed throughout the entire game, as though it is in some way punishing humanity for its sins. The holy magic rushes in at the last second in an attempt to stop this, though it appears that it is simply not enough. Just when it seems that humanity is doomed, suddenly, a small growth starts out from the ground. To me, it almost reminds me of a plant blossoming from the dirt. It seems that through all of their actions, humanity's efforts were not enough, and even the holy magic was not enough. The one thing that is able to save the planet is itself. The livestream blossoms out of the ground and surrounds the meteor with vein-like tendrils and appendages reaching all the way up around it. The life stream is essentially all of the living souls that have passed away on the planet, and once again it gives me imagery and the thought of life coming from death, the cycle of rebirth of which Final Fantasy VII is based on. Multiple characters go through this same process throughout the game's progression, and it seems to me to be the central theme, that when things are at their worst, when things seem hopeless, humans fight back and find a way. Even through grief, death, and terrible struggles, we persist. Final Fantasy VII is honestly so much more than just a game to me. It completely defined my childhood. It was an extremely daunting task to make this analysis, and quite honestly, I am scared to put it out, but I'm going to face